For thousands of years, the Jedi believed they understood this cosmic tapestry. Until the night something tore through it that had no place in their philosophy, no connection to their precious midi-chlorians, and no intention of playing by their rules. The Sith thought they had mastered the galaxy's darkness, bending it to their will through passion and power. They were wrong. True darkness wore a leather coat, carried silver stakes, and had been hunting monsters for longer than most species had spaceflight. The hyperspace anomaly appeared without warning in the Corellian Run, a bleeding wound in reality that sent every nearby ship's Navy computer into screaming failure. Automated distress beacons triggered across 3 sectors as the rift pulsed with energy that registered on no known spectrum, not hyperspace radiation, not ion discharge, not even the esoteric signatures of ancient Sith alchemy. It simply was a wrongness in the fabric of space that made seasoned pilots veer away on instinct alone. Then something fell through. No ship, no debris. Just a body tumbling through the void, wrapped in a long coat that shouldn't have survived the absolute zero of space. The figure crashed through the atmosphere of Nar Shaddaa, the smuggler's moon, vertical city of a trillion sins, like a meteor wrapped in impossible defiance of physics. Repulsor lifts failed, speeders swerved. A Rhodian spice dealer looked up from his corner in the refugee sector just in time to see a black shape punch through 3 levels of duracrete and permacrete, leaving a smoking crater in the middle of his territory. Eric Brooks, Blade to those who knew what he hunted, rose from the wreckage with bones that had already healed and a body that had survived worse. Much worse. The impact should have killed him. Would have killed anything human. But Blade hadn't been fully human since the night his mother died, giving birth to him in a vampire's feeding room. Her blood mixing with the monster's venom to create something the supernatural world would learn to fear. The Daywalker. He rolled his shoulders, feeling vertebrae pop back into alignment, and assessed his surroundings with senses that caught every heartbeat within 200 meters, every breath, every panicked whisper in a dozen languages he'd never heard before. The architecture was wrong. Too vertical, too neon, too alien. The smell hit him next, a cocktail of species he couldn't identify. Ozone from technology he didn't recognize, and underneath it all, the copper penny taste of fear. Blade's hand went instinctively to his hip. His sword, a silver-edged katana that had tasted vampire blood across 4 continents, was still there. The pistols, loaded with silver nitrate rounds, remained holstered. The tactical vest held stakes, UV grenades, and the compact weaponry of a man who turned vampire hunting into an art form. Everything had made the journey, everything except his serum. He felt it immediately, that old familiar gnawing at the base of his skull. The thirst, the need. Without the serum to suppress his vampiric nature, the bloodlust would grow. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. He'd have hours, maybe a day or 2 if he was lucky, before the hunger became unmanageable. In his world, that meant a quick trip to his safe house, a fresh injection, and back to the hunt. But as Blade looked up at the impossible cityscape towering above him, kilometers of vertical construction that made Manhattan look quaint, species he'd never seen walking alongside humans, and speeders flying in patterns that defied everything he knew about traffic laws. One fact became crystal clear. He wasn't in his world anymore. A crowd was gathering. Blade counted 15 beings within immediate strike range. Humans, yes, but also creatures with head tails, orange skin, and eyes that reflected light like predators. Some carried weapons, crude by his standards, shaped like oversized pistols that probably fired energy instead of bullets. Others just stared, that universal expression of shock crossing species barriers. "The hell you looking at?" Blade's voice cut through the murmur, that dangerous edge that had made vampires flee and humans take 3 steps back, even when they didn't understand why. A Nikto enforcer, his horned face covered in ritual scars, made the mistake of reaching for his blaster. Blade moved. To the crowd, it looked like teleportation. One moment, the dark-skinned warrior stood in the crater. The next, he had crossed 5 meters and disarmed the Nikto with a speed that left the enforcer's 3 fingers broken and his weapon in Blade's hand. The weapon, a DL-18 blaster pistol, though Blade didn't know that name, felt wrong in his grip. Too light. No recoil mechanism because it fired condensed energy packets instead of bullets. Blade squeezed the trigger. The red bolt punched through a rusted repulsor lift engine 30 meters away, superheating the metal to slag in an instant. The crowd scattered. Smart. Blade had no intention of killing civilians, but they didn't know that. And right now their fear was a useful tool. "Someone's going to tell me where I am," Blade said, his voice carrying that particular tone that suggested non-compliance would be painful. "And they're going to tell me now." A human smuggler, young and stupid enough to still have ideals, raised shaking hands. "Nar Shaddaa. You're on Nar Shaddaa, the smuggler's moon. This is Hutt space, man. You just crashed into Black Sun territory." Hutt space. Black Sun. None of those words meant anything to Blade, but the fear in the kid's voice told him everything he needed to know. Criminal territory. Someone's turf. Good. Criminals he understood. Criminals spoke a universal language: violence, profit, and the food chain. Blade tossed the blaster back to the Nikto, who caught it with his unbroken hand and wisely didn't aim it. "Where can I get medical supplies, pharmaceuticals, chemistry equipment?" The smuggler blinked. The Corellian sector? There's clinics, black market docks. But you need credits, and Black Sun's going to... Black Sun's going to what? Blade's eyes, hidden behind his signature sunglasses, even in Nar Shaddaa's eternal artificial twilight, fixed on the smuggler with an intensity that made the kid's survival instincts scream. "Come looking for me. Good. Saves me the trouble of finding them." He needed supplies. Needed to synthesize something, anything, to keep the thirst manageable while he figured out what kind of dimensional hellhole he'd fallen into. The ritual. Those vampire cultists had been attempting something with words that hurt to hear, symbols that bled reality. He'd interrupted it, put silver through the head priest's skull, but not before the bastard finished the incantation. And now Blade was here, wherever here was. The crowd continued to disperse, but Blade felt other eyes on him now. Watchers. Professional ones. His enhanced hearing caught the subvocal whispers of comlink communications, the safety clicks of weapons being readied in the shadows. This Black Sun organization was responding to the intrusion in their territory. Perfect. Blade started walking toward what his instincts identified as the nearest major thoroughfare, his coat billowing behind him as he moved with the predatory grace of something that had hunted apex predators for decades. The refugee sector's twisted corridors didn't slow him. His senses mapped every alcove, every hidden watcher, every potential ambush point. Above, beyond the neon haze and the vertical city's light pollution, Nar Shaddaa's sky showed glimpses of something massive. A gas giant, swirling with storms that could swallow Earth whole. Moons orbited in patterns that made no sense. The stars themselves looked wrong, constellations that bore no resemblance to anything in Earth's sky. Blade had been to hell dimensions, had fought demons in abandoned warehouses and vampires in underground catacombs. had seen things that would make rational people question reality. This was different. This was somewhere else entirely. And somewhere in this alien galaxy, there would be monsters. There always were. Different faces, different powers, maybe different names. But at their core, monsters were monsters. They preyed on the weak. They hid in shadows. They thought themselves untouchable. They were wrong. The Daywalker had arrived, and this galaxy, with its Force and its Jedi and its Sith and whatever other cosmic powers thought they ruled the darkness, was about to learn an ancient truth. There was always a bigger predator. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. Blade disappeared into Nar Shaddah's neon-soaked labyrinth, a hunter without prey in a galaxy that didn't know it should be afraid. Behind him, the crater still smoked. Around him, the whispers began to spread. And above, in the administrative levels where crime lords counted their profits and planned their wars, sensors registered an anomaly that Imperial intelligence would flag within the hour. Something had entered the galaxy. Something hungry. The Corellian sector existed in Nar Shaddah's mid-levels, where legitimate business wore a thin mask over criminal enterprise, and everyone pretended not to notice. Blade navigated the maze of walkways and transit tubes with the casual efficiency of a man who'd spent decades hunting through urban decay. The architecture might be alien, but predatory economics translated across universes. The desperate congregated where credits flowed, and credits flowed where vices thrived. He'd already killed 3 beings, not murdered. Killed. There was a difference. One Blade had learned to parse in the moral gray zones where monsters wore human faces, and humans sometimes needed killing more than the monsters did. The first had been a Weequay slaver, trying to force a Twi'lek child into a cargo container. The slaver's neck had snapped with a sound like cracking ice before his brain registered movement. The second and third were Black Sun enforcers who'd made the tactical error of trying to collect a bounty already circulating through the underworld. 10,000 credits for the dark-skinned human with archaic weapons who'd violated their territory. Their bodies now decorated an alley in the industrial ward, arranged in a manner that sent a message to anyone fluent in the universal language of violence. I'm not trapped in here with you. You're trapped in here with me. Blade pushed through the doors of a clinic advertising discreet medical services. No questions, no records, no Imperial entanglements. The waiting area held a Rodian with a blaster burn across his shoulder. A human woman who looked like she'd lost an argument with a vibroblade, and a protocol droid whose optical sensors tracked Blade's entrance with mechanical precision. The doctor is currently... The droid began in a prim, accented voice. Not anymore. Blade walked past the desk toward the examination room. The droid's programming struggled between customer service protocols and self-preservation. Self-preservation 1. It stayed seated. The doctor, a middle-aged human male with the trembling hands of a spice addict and the paranoid eyes of someone who'd seen too many Black Sun debt collections, looked up from stitching the Rodian's wound. You can't just... Blade placed a stack of credit chits on the medical tray. He'd liberated them from the Black Sun enforcers, along with their weapons and a curious data device that seemed to function like a sophisticated smartphone. The chits represented more money than this back-alley butcher probably saw in a month. Chemistry equipment, Blade said. Centrifuge, synthesizer, whatever you use to compound medications, access to your pharmaceutical database, and privacy for the next 2 hours. The doctor stared at the credits, then at Blade, then at the sword hilts visible beneath the leather coat. His medical training warred with his survival instincts. Survival 1. Examination Room 3. In the back. I'll transfer my workstation access. Blade collected the credits and headed for the indicated room, leaving the doctor to finish his work and wisely decide that some customers were better served quickly and forgotten immediately. The examination room was cramped but functional, equipped with technology that looked simultaneously advanced and jury-rigged. Standard for criminal medical facilities across any universe. Blade accessed the doctor's terminal, his fingers moving across the holographic interface with the adaptability of someone who'd learned to use vampire tracking apps, black market weapons databases, and encrypted darknet forums with equal facility. The pharmaceutical database was extensive. Hundreds of species, thousands of compounds, dosage calculations that accounted for metabolisms ranging from silicon-based huts to insectoid geonosians. Blade filtered for humanoid physiology and began cross-referencing molecular structures against his mental catalog of serum components. Nothing matched exactly. Of course it didn't. This galaxy's biochemistry had evolved along entirely different paths. But chemistry was chemistry, and Blade had synthesized his own serum enough times to understand the underlying principles. He needed something to suppress adrenal response, regulate dopamine production, and most critically, dull the predatory aggression that came with his vampiric nature. Thirst gnawed at the base of his skull, a familiar pressure building behind his eyes. Not critical yet, but growing. He had perhaps 18 hours before the bloodlust became unmanageable. Maybe 24 if he stayed out of combat situations that triggered his hunting instincts. 24 hours in hostile territory surrounded by criminals. Not promising odds. Blade began selecting compounds. A Corellian beta blocker that showed promise for adrenal suppression. A Naboo neurochemical inhibitor used to treat combat stress. A Rylothian enzyme that might regulate his augmented metabolism. The synthesizer hummed as it combined the compounds in ratios Blade adjusted by instinct and decades of biochemical experience. The first batch came out wrong. Too viscous, the molecular weight off by enough to trigger his enhanced senses rejection response. He dumped it and started again, adjusting ratios, compensating for the alien components, letting his body's reaction guide the process. This was alchemy, not science. Mad chemistry performed by a monster trying to stay human. The door burst open. Blade had heard them coming. 6 heartbeats, moving with the coordinated rhythm of trained soldiers rather than street thugs. His hand was already on his sword hilt when they entered, but he didn't draw. Not yet. He wanted to see what this galaxy's criminals looked like when they thought they had the advantage. The leader was human, surprisingly. Scarred face, military-grade armor under a formal jacket, and a blaster rifle that looked considerably more expensive than the crude pistols Blade had seen earlier. His 5 backup, a mix of human and alien mercenaries, fanned out with professional spacing, covering angles, blocking the exit. "You're the one who killed Venick and Corso," the leader said. Not a question. Black Sun doesn't appreciate unauthorized executions in our territory. Blade continued working, adding a stabilizing agent to his compound. They shouldn't have gotten in my way. Everything on Nar Shaddaa is in someone's way. That's how territory works. The leader's rifle didn't quite point at Blade, but the threat was implicit. "You're going to come with us. The Vigo wants to meet the man stupid enough to declare war on Black Sun with just a sword and attitude." Not interested. The synthesizer chimed. Blade withdrew the vial, pale blue liquid that caught the examination room's harsh lighting. Close enough. He loaded it into an injector designed for emergency Bacta administration, modified the dosage to account for his augmented metabolism, and pressed it against his neck. The injection burned going in, foreign compounds rushing through his cardiovascular system like ice water mixed with acid. Blade's enhanced healing immediately began processing the drugs, accepting some components, rejecting others, his hybrid physiology adapting in real time. The pressure behind his eyes eased. Not gone, but manageable. The thirst receded to a dull background whisper. 6 hours, maybe 8. Then he'd need another dose, and the compounds would be less effective. Diminishing returns, always diminishing returns. But it bought him time. You ignoring me? The leader's patience was eroding. Last chance. Walk out on your feet or get dragged. Your choice. Blade finally looked at them directly, his eyes hidden behind sunglasses that reflected the mercenary's own uncertain expressions. You should leave. That's not how this... Blade moved. The examination room was 6 meters by 4, barely larger than the vampire nest he'd cleared in Prague that had held 15 undead and a blood ritual in progress. Tight quarters were his specialty. The leader managed to raise his rifle halfway before Blade's palm strike crushed his sternum, driving bone fragments into his heart. The second mercenary, a Quarren whose tentacles flared in surprise, took Blade's elbow to the skull hard enough to crack the examination table when his body hit it. A blaster bolt scorched past Blade's shoulder, superheating the air, the smell of ozone sharp and electric. He spun into the shot's trajectory, using the third mercenary's own weapon positioning against him, breaking the alien's trigger finger and redirecting the rifle into the fourth mercenary's face. The weapon discharged on full auto, red bolts painting the ceiling with molten duracrete before Blade ripped it free and used it as a bludgeon. The fifth and sixth mercenaries, humans with the look of former Imperial military, actually managed to coordinate fire. Their bolts hit Blade in the shoulder and thigh, burning through his coat, searing flesh that immediately began to regenerate. The pain was sharp, clean, familiar. Nothing compared to silver poisoning or UV burns that boiled vampire flesh. Nothing his healing factor couldn't process. Blade closed the distance before they could fire again, his sword finally clearing its sheath in a silver arc that caught the overhead lighting like captured moonlight. The blade was ancient, forged from an alloy that couldn't exist in this galaxy, etched with symbols that predated modern vampire hunting, and carried the blood debt of 500 kills. It sang through the fifth mercenary's blaster rifle, through his armor, through bone and organs. The sixth mercenary dropped his weapon and ran, survival instincts finally overriding employment contract. Blade let him go. One survivor to carry the message was strategically sound. The room was silent except for labored breathing and the electrical hum of damaged equipment. Blade wiped his blade clean on the leader's jacket, returned it to its sheath, and went back to the synthesizer. He had enough components for perhaps 3 more doses before he'd need to either source new materials or find a more permanent solution. Neither option was promising. The doctor appeared in the doorway, took one look at the carnage, and immediately retreated. Smart man. Blade collected his synthesized serum vials, pocketed additional medical supplies, and performed a quick triage on his own injuries. The blaster wounds were already closing, his hybrid healing knitting tissue at a rate that would look like sorcery to anyone watching. By morning, there'd be nothing but new scars to join the collection. He'd been in this galaxy for less than 4 hours and already had a body count in double digits. Efficient, even by his standards. Blade exited through the clinic's rear entrance into Nar Shaddah's eternal twilight, where neon advertisements competed with the gas giant's reflected light, and the vertical city's architecture created shadows deep enough to hide armies. Somewhere in those shadows, he knew, watchers were reporting his location. This Black Sun organization would escalate. That was fine. Let them come. He'd faced vampire covens, werewolf packs, and demon cults with resources that made organized crime look like street gangs. But as Blade navigated the walkways toward the lower levels where his enhanced senses detected fewer civilians, where the violence could escalate without collateral damage, he felt something else watching him. Not criminals, not thugs with blasters and mercenary contracts. Something other. The sensation crawled across his enhanced senses like static electricity, raising the hair on his neck despite having faced supernatural horrors that would drive normal humans insane. It felt like being observed by something that existed in multiple places simultaneously, a presence that touched the edge of his awareness without fully materializing. Whatever this galaxy's equivalent of supernatural was, it had noticed him. And it was curious. The fifth brother felt the disturbance like a splinter driven beneath his fingernail. Small, sharp, and impossible to ignore, he stood aboard his personal Inquisitor transport in high orbit above Nar Shaddaa, his massive frame silhouetted against the viewport showing the smuggler's moon's glittering urban sprawl. The meditation came reluctantly, his connection to the dark side turbulent with frustration. Grand Inquisitor's orders had been explicit. Investigate the anomaly that Imperial sensors detected in the hyperspace lanes. Determined if it represented a threat to the Empire. Eliminate it if Jedi. Recruit it if useful. Standard Inquisitorius protocol for hunting Order 66 survivors who'd evaded the initial purge. But this was neither Jedi nor Sith. The presence in the Force was a void, an absence that somehow screamed louder than presence should. Not empty like the Yuuzhan Vong of ancient records, those extra-galactic invaders had been completely outside the Force's touch. This was different. This felt like a predator that existed in spaces between the light and dark, feeding on neither, yet resonating with both. My lord? His pilot's voice crackled through the comlink, pulling him from meditation. Imperial intelligence forwarded updated intel on the target. 17 confirmed kills in 6 hours. Black Sun has issued a sector-wide bounty. The Hutts are displeased. 17. The fifth brother's scarred lips twisted into something approximating a smile. Efficiency. Perhaps this anomaly would prove useful after all. The Emperor's Inquisitorius always needed effective killers. And this one's body count suggested competence. Where is he now? Lower industrial sectors. Security feeds show him moving toward the Corellian docks. Black Sun is mobilizing a kill team, 40 soldiers, heavy weapons. Tell them to stand down. My lord, they're criminals. They don't. Then they'll die. The fifth brother's voice carried the casual certainty of someone who'd ordered executions as easily as breathing. Prepare my shuttle. I'll handle this personally. The pilot wisely didn't argue. Blade smelled the ambush 3 blocks before walking into it. 43 heartbeats positioned in overlapping kill zones across the industrial plaza's elevated walkways. Heavy weapons. His enhanced hearing caught the distinctive whine of charging energy cells, the mechanical clicks of tripod-mounted guns being locked into firing position. They'd evacuated the civilians, turned the entire sector into a free fire zone. Professional, almost respectful. He kept walking. The plaza was a junction of cargo routes and freight elevators, Durasteel catwalks crisscrossing above massive repulsor lift platforms that moved containers between levels. Rust and industrial chemical stench hung in the air, mixing with the ozone smell of Nar Shaddaa's perpetual electrical haze. Somewhere in the distance, a cargo hauler's engine screamed as it lifted off from a nearby dock. That's far enough. The voice echoed from speakers positioned around the plaza, electronically amplified. You've killed Black Sun soldiers, violated our territory. The Vigo has authorized your immediate execution. Blade stopped in the plaza's center, slowly turning to count positions. 43 had been accurate. They'd also brought 2 repeating blaster cannons, vehicle-mounted weapons capable of punching through reinforced armor. Overkill for one man. Smart. "I'll give you one chance," Blade called out, his voice carrying without amplification. "Walk away. Tell your Vigo I didn't come here looking for war, but I won't die here either." Silence. Then laughter from multiple positions. "You're outnumbered 40-1, standing in the open, and you think we should run?" The voice dripped contempt. "This is Nar Shaddaa. We've killed Jedi here. What makes you think you're special?" Blade drew his sword with his right hand, a modified pistol with his left. Not his preferred silver-loaded firearms, but a weapon he'd taken from one of the mercenaries, its energy cell fully charged. The blade caught the plaza's harsh industrial lighting, silver edge gleaming. "I've killed things that eat Jedi for breakfast," Blade said quietly, knowing his enhanced voice would carry to every mercenary position. "Last chance." The repeating blasters opened fire first. Blade moved before the bolts reached him, enhanced speed turning the world into a blur of motion and tactical calculation. The first volley tore through the space where he'd been standing, superheating Durasteel decking into molten slag. He was already on the nearest catwalk, his sword taking the first mercenary's head before the man's finger left the trigger. Blaster fire converged from 6 positions. Blade used the catwalk's support struts for cover, the metal-absorbing energy bolts meant for his chest. His stolen pistol spoke twice, not the spray and pray of panicked shooting, but precise double taps that dropped 2 mercenaries from elevated positions. They fell screaming, bodies hitting the plaza floor with sounds that made the remaining soldiers pause. "Concentrate fire. Section 3, lay down suppression." The commander's voice had lost its confidence, taking on the clipped tones of someone watching a tactical situation deteriorate. Blade vaulted between catwalks with impossible grace, his enhanced agility treating the 3-story gap like a simple step. A Rodian mercenary tried tracking him with a blaster rifle, finger tightening on trigger. Blade's sword took the weapon first, then the hands holding it, then the throat. 3 movements, 1 second. The repeating blasters swiveled, trying to track movement too fast for their targeting computers. Blade dropped to the lower level as bolts chewed through the catwalk he'd just abandoned, metal screeching and collapsing in a shower of sparks. He rolled through the debris field, came up firing, and put an energy bolt through the first cannon's power cell. The explosion painted the catwalk orange and red, silhouetting 3 mercenaries who'd been too close. Their screaming stopped when the fireball consumed them. 28 left. Blade's enhanced senses tracked every heartbeat, every breath, every panicked whisper into comlinks, calling for reinforcements that wouldn't arrive in time. This wasn't a fight. It was a harvest. He'd spent decades hunting supernatural predators who could move faster than human perception, regenerate from grievous wounds, and had literal centuries of combat experience. These were just men with guns. The second repeating blaster found him crossing open ground. The barrage caught Blade in the side and shoulder, energy bolts designed to penetrate light vehicle armor, burning through his coat and flesh. Pain exploded across his torso. Real pain, the kind that bypassed even his enhanced healing's immediate response. Blade stumbled, went to one knee, and felt his hybrid nature surge in response to injury. The bloodlust roared. His synthesized serum was already struggling, foreign compounds unable to fully suppress the predator that lived beneath his skin. The pain, the violence, the smell of blood and burning flesh. All of it fed the hunger that was his birthright and his curse. Blade's vision edged with red, his enhanced senses sharpening to supernatural clarity as the vampire side of his nature took greater control. He stopped retreating. The mercenaries saw him stand despite wounds that should have dropped him, saw him start walking toward the repeating blaster with a sword that gleamed like captured moonlight. And several made the intelligent decision to run. The others opened fire with everything they had, turning the plaza into a light show of red energy bolts that converged on a single leather-coated figure who refused to die. Blade took 4 more hits, reaching the cannon. His healing factor was working overtime now, regenerating tissue as fast as blaster fire destroyed it. His hybrid metabolism burning through energy reserves that would have killed a normal human from shock alone. He grabbed the cannon's barrel while it was still firing, the superheated metal searing his palm, and twisted. The Dura-Steel barrel bent like putty. The weapon's power cell overloaded, feedback loop turning the entire assembly into an improvised bomb. Blade threw himself backward as it detonated, the shockwave launching him across the plaza to crash through a loading dock's corrugated wall. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of flames and the groaning of damaged infrastructure. Blade rose from the wreckage, his coat smoking, his body a roadmap of burns and wounds that were already closing. His sword remained in his hand, untarnished, faithful. Of the 43 mercenaries, perhaps 15 remained, scattered, demoralized, and now dealing with the psychological reality that their target had survived firepower designed to kill light-armored vehicles. Anyone else? Blade's voice carried across the burning plaza, rough with barely suppressed bloodlust. The survivors ran. Blade let them. His hands were shaking now. The serum's effectiveness reduced to maybe 3 hours before the next dose. The fight had accelerated his metabolism, burned through the synthetic suppressants, and brought the thirst closer to the surface. He needed to feed soon. Not blood necessarily, but the hunt, the kill, the primal satisfaction of ending something that deserved ending. This galaxy would provide. It always did. Then Blade felt it again. That presence, that otherness that had watched him since the clinic. A shuttle was descending into the plaza, sleek and black, marked with an Imperial crest that meant nothing to Blade, but carried weight in the way the few remaining mercenaries fled at its appearance. The craft landed with predatory grace, its boarding ramp extending like a tongue. A figure emerged, massive, 2 meters tall and built like violence incarnate. Wrapped in dark armor that reflected the plaza's flames in fractured patterns. His skin was gray, his eyes burned yellow with something that wasn't quite human. And when he moved, it was with the casual confidence of an apex predator surveying territory it owned. But more importantly, wrongly, Blade's enhanced senses screamed a warning his rational mind couldn't parse. This being's heartbeat was there. Steady, powerful, alive, but overlaid with something else. An energy that existed in a spectrum Blade couldn't see, couldn't touch, but could feel pressing against his awareness like invisible hands. Impressive, the figure said, his voice a rumbling bass that carried undertones of threat. You fight well for someone without the Force. Force. There was that word again. Blade had heard it whispered in the clinic, muttered by the mercenaries. Referenced in the data he'd skimmed from the stolen devices. Some kind of power. Some kind of religion. Mythology. Don't know what that is, Blade said. His sword still drawn, his body coiled despite injuries that would hospitalize anyone else. And don't care. You here to die like the rest? The massive figure smiled, revealing teeth filed to points. I am the 5th brother, Inquisitor in service to the Galactic Empire. I'm here to determine if you're worth recruiting. He ignited something from his belt, a weapon that materialized as a cylinder of red light, humming with barely contained energy. Or if you're just another corpse waiting to happen. A lightsaber. Blade recognized the design from his stolen data, though seeing one in person carried different weight. Plasma contained in a magnetic field, capable of cutting through nearly anything, the signature weapon of this galaxy's warrior mystics. Dangerous, potentially lethal, even to his healing factor. Perfect. Your funeral, Blade said, and attacked. The fifth brother's smile widened. Finally, the Force whispered, "Something interesting." The feeling of being watched didn't fade after Blade left the clinic. If anything, it intensified as he moved through Nar Shaddah's lower levels. That crawling sensation across his enhanced senses that suggested observation from something that existed partially outside normal perception. He'd felt similar sensations hunting vampires who'd mastered blood magic, tracking demons who could slip between dimensions, confronting supernatural threats that bent reality around their presence. This was different, more pervasive, less localized, like the entire galaxy was turning its attention toward him, one curious eye at a time. Blade found temporary shelter in an abandoned warehouse district, where even Nar Shaddah's criminal infrastructure had given up pretending civilization existed. Rusted machinery created shadows within shadows, and the smell of chemical waste was strong enough that most species avoided the area entirely. His enhanced physiology filtered the toxins automatically, his hybrid metabolism processing compounds that would have killed baseline humans in minutes. He injected another dose of serum, the third since arriving in this galaxy, and felt it buy him maybe 4 more hours of control. The diminishing returns were accelerating faster than he'd calculated. By tomorrow, he'd need doses every 2 hours. By the day after, every hour. The math was simple and unforgiving. He needed better resources, better equipment, better understanding of this galaxy's biochemistry, which meant he needed to survive long enough to acquire them. Blade pulled out the datapad he'd taken from the Black Sun mercenaries, its screen still displaying the bounty notice that had been circulating through the underworld. 10,000 credits for information leading to capture of dark-skinned human male, armed with archaic bladed weapons, extremely dangerous. Black Sun authorization. No kill order capture preferred for interrogation. Capture preferred. That was almost funny. They thought they could interrogate him, probably torture him for information about who sent him and what his agenda was. They didn't understand that he'd been tortured by beings who'd perfected cruelty across centuries. That pain was just another form of input his hybrid physiology processed and adapted to. But the bounty itself was a problem. 10,000 credits was apparently significant money in this galaxy, enough that every 2-bit criminal and desperate bounty hunter would be scanning crowds for his face. Nar Shaddaa had millions of inhabitants, but a human in a leather coat carrying swords wasn't exactly subtle. He needed to move, needed to get off this moon before the net tightened completely. The datapad chimed with an incoming transmission not directed at him specifically, but a general broadcast on Black Sun's encrypted frequencies that his stolen device was receiving. Blade activated it, curious what the criminal organization was saying about him now. The hologram showed a Faline crime lord, his green skin marked with ritual scars that suggested high rank within Black Sun's hierarchy. His voice carried the smooth confidence of someone who'd ordered executions while eating dinner and never lost his appetite. All Black Sun operatives, priority alert. The anomaly designated Blade has been elevated to critical threat status. As of 1 hour ago, Imperial intelligence has also flagged this target. Inquisitorius assets are en route to Nar Shaddaa. We are suspending active pursuit and will defer to Imperial authority on this matter. The hologram flickered and died. Blade's jaw tightened. Inquisitorius. That's what the fifth brother had called himself, an Inquisitor serving the Empire, which meant more Force wielders were coming, probably better trained than the one he'd maimed. Definitely more prepared for an opponent who could fight them without supernatural powers. The feeling of being watched suddenly crystallized into certainty, not metaphorical observation. Actual, physical surveillance from something that had been tracking him since the clinic fight. Blade's enhanced senses swept the warehouse, cataloging every shadow, every sound, every displacement of air that suggested movement. Nothing, but the presence was there, just beyond his ability to pinpoint, like trying to see something in peripheral vision that disappeared when you looked directly at it. "I know you're there," Blade said quietly, his hand on his sword. "Been feeling you watching since I killed those mercenaries. You want something? Show yourself. You want to fight? Make your move. But stop hiding like a coward." Silence. Then, from the shadows near the warehouse's collapsed eastern wall, a voice that resonated with harmonics, suggesting vocal cords damaged beyond human normal. "Interesting. You can sense observation through the Force despite having no connection to it yourself." A figure emerged, massive, gray-skinned, wrapped in dark robes that concealed details until he stepped into the warehouse's dim lighting. The fifth brother's yellow eyes fixed on Blade with an intensity that suggested both curiosity and predatory assessment. "You're the anomaly," the Inquisitor continued, igniting his lightsaber with a snap hiss that filled the warehouse with red light. "The one who appears in the Force as a void, as an absence, as something that shouldn't exist." Blade's hand tightened on his sword hilt but didn't draw yet. "You came alone. That's either brave or stupid. Neither. Strategic." The fifth brother began circling, his massive frame moving with surprising grace despite the cybernetic enhancements visible beneath his robes. "The Grand Inquisitor wants you captured and interrogated," Lord Vader has expressed. "Interest in anomalies that defy the Force. But I wanted to see you for myself first. Wanted to understand what you are, before I decide whether you're worth bringing in alive. And if you decide I'm not," the fifth brother's smile revealed teeth filed to points, "then I'll bring your corpse instead." Lord Vader is equally satisfied with either option. Blade finally drew his sword, the silver blade catching the lightsaber's red glow and reflecting it in patterns that seemed to move independently. "You should have brought backup. I killed 3 Jedi Knights on Kashyyyk without assistance. I hunted a Padawan across 7 systems before cornering her on Dantooine and breaking her spirit before her body. I am an Inquisitor of the Empire, trained in the dark side of the Force, and I have forgotten more about killing than you'll ever learn." The boast was impressive, almost convinced Blade it was genuine confidence rather than compensation for uncertainty. "Almost. You know what I've noticed about you Force users?" Blade said, beginning his own circling pattern that would position him near support columns and debris fields. "You talk too much. Like you need to convince yourselves you're as dangerous as you think you are." The fifth brother's smile vanished. "Probably, but you'll be too dead to appreciate it." The Inquisitor attacked first, not with his lightsaber initially, but with the Force. Blade felt the telekinetic pressure an instant before a cargo container weighing several tons flew toward him with enough velocity to paste him against the warehouse wall. His enhanced reflexes let him dive beneath it, the container smashing through the wall behind where he'd been standing with a sound like reality breaking. Blade came up firing, his stolen blaster pistol speaking 3 times in rapid succession. The fifth brother deflected 2 bolts with his lightsaber, the red blade moving in defensive patterns that suggested decades of practice. The third bolt hit his shoulder pauldron, superheating metal but not penetrating. "Predictable," the Inquisitor said, and attacked with his lightsaber in earnest. The blade came in fast, faster than Blade had anticipated, augmented by Force-enhanced speed that closed the distance in a blur. Blade's sword met it purely on instinct, the silver edge intercepting the lightsaber's plasma blade with a sound that shouldn't have been possible. Metal meeting energy, both refusing to yield. The fifth brother's yellow eyes widened in genuine shock. "What? How is that blade?" Blade didn't waste time on explanations. He disengaged, spun inside the Inquisitor's guard, and drove his knee into the Force wielder's damaged leg with enough force to crack bone. The fifth brother staggered, his concentration breaking, and Blade pressed the advantage with a combination attack that would have worked perfectly against vampires who relied on supernatural speed over technical skill. It worked pretty well against Force users too. His sword found flesh, not a killing blow, but a line across the Inquisitor's ribs that drew blood and pain. The fifth brother roared, calling on the Force to blast Blade backward with telekinetic power that felt like being hit by an invisible wall moving at highway speeds. Blade crashed through debris, his enhanced durability the only thing preventing the impact from liquefying his organs. He rolled with the momentum, came up with his sword still in hand, and reassessed. The fifth brother was wounded but far from beaten. His lightsaber spun in defensive patterns, his connection to the Force wrapping around him like invisible armor, his eyes burning with fury that had moved past professional assessment into personal vendetta. "I'm going to enjoy breaking you," the Inquisitor growled, advancing with mechanical precision. "Going to make you scream. Going to prove that without the Force, you're nothing but meat waiting to be carved." Blade's response was simple. He smiled, not a friendly expression, but the predatory baring of teeth that vampires recognized as the last thing they'd see before silver found their hearts. "You can try." The warehouse erupted into violence as Hunter and Inquisitor collided. Lightsaber meeting ancient blade, Force powers confronting enhanced physiology, two beings who'd each killed hundreds, testing whether skill or supernatural power would prove superior. Outside, Nar Shaddah's eternal neon glow continued painting the vertical city in colors of vice and desperation. Criminal organizations watched censor feeds and placed new bets on outcomes. And somewhere in the depths of space, other predators were converging on this moon, drawn by reports of an anomaly that had made the Empire's hunting organization take notice. The fight had begun. The galaxy would remember what came next. The fifth brother had killed 37 Jedi since Order 66. Padawans, mostly young, inexperienced, their connection to the Force powerful but untrained in the brutal realities of inquisitorial combat. A few knights had tested his skills, their lightsaber forms elegant but rigid, bound by Jedi philosophy that made them hesitate at critical moments. One master had actually wounded him on Lothal, a scar across his ribs that still ached in cold weather, before he'd crushed the old fool's windpipe with the Force. None of them had moved like this. Blade's opening strike came with no warning in the Force, no precognitive ripple, no telegraphed intent, just sudden explosive violence that crossed the 3 meters between them before the fifth brother's enhanced reflexes fully registered movement. The silver blade screamed toward his throat with a speed that matched Force-enhanced combat, the edge-catching plaza firelight like captured lightning. The fifth brother's lightsaber intercepted on pure instinct, red plasma meeting ancient metal in a shower of sparks that defied physics. The lightsaber should have sheared through the primitive sword like tissue paper. Instead, the blades locked. The lightsabers contained plasma, sputtering against an alloy that had no business existing in this galaxy. "Impossible," the fifth brother growled, pushing back with strength augmented by the dark side. Blade didn't waste breath on responses. He disengaged, rolled the bind, and came back with a horizontal cut aimed at the Inquisitor's midsection, a textbook maneuver from Kenjutsu that transitioned into a vertical slash from a completely different fighting style. Filipino Kali merged with Japanese swordwork, European fencing footwork supporting movements that drew from 5 continents worth of blade combat. The fifth brother backpedaled, his precognition screaming warnings a half-second before each strike materialized. But Blade's attacks came from angles that made no sense in the Force's preview. His combat flow so erratic and adaptive that prediction became useless. Strike patterns that began as one style mid-swing transformed into another. Feints that could become genuine attacks depending on the opponent's response. It was maddening, like trying to predict chaos. The fifth brother called on the Force, hurling a cargo container at Blade with telekinetic power strong enough to crush a speeder. Blade saw it coming, enhanced senses tracking the massive object's trajectory, and dove beneath it, the container passing close enough for its displaced air to tear at his coat. He came up inside the Inquisitor's guard, sword seeking the gap between helmet and chest armor. The fifth brother twisted, the blade scoring a line across his pauldron that left molten metal in its wake. His lightsaber came around in a vicious overhand cut that would have bisected Blade from shoulder to hip. Blade caught it on his sword. The impact drove him to one knee, the lightsaber's plasma edge grinding against silver metal that shrieked in protest but refused to yield. Heat washed over Blade's face, his sunglasses cracking from thermal stress. The fifth brother bore down with the Force augmenting his strength. 200 kilograms of muscle and rage trying to force the killing blow through Blade's guard. "You fight well," the Inquisitor said, his yellow eyes blazing. "But without the Force, you're just meat waiting for slaughter." Blade's response was to drive his fist into the fifth brother's knee with enough force to crack bone. The Inquisitor bellowed, his concentration breaking, and Blade exploded upward with a rising strike that forced his opponent backward. Blood ran down the fifth brother's leg, real blood, red and human despite the yellow eyes and gray skin. Pain was pain. Injuries were injuries. Whatever this Force was, it didn't make its users immortal. Good to know. The fifth brother limped back, reassessing. The anomaly fought like someone who'd spent a lifetime killing things that could kill him back. No wasted movement, no hesitation, no mercy. Every strike targeted joints, arteries, and vulnerable spots with surgical precision. This wasn't a Force-sensitive warrior relying on precognition and mystical power. This was a professional. "What are you?" the fifth brother demanded, buying time for his dark side healing to knit the damaged knee. "You have no connection to the Force. No midi-chlorians. But you move like..." Blade shot him. The stolen blaster pistol still holstered at Blade's hip came up and fired 3 times in rapid succession. The first bolt hit the fifth brother's chest plate, absorbed by armor designed to withstand lightsaber strikes. The second and third targeted the damaged knee, superheating already traumatized tissue and shattering the kneecap completely. The Inquisitor went down, more from surprise than injury, and Blade was already moving. His sword came down in an executioner's arc, aimed at the neck joint between helmet and armor. The Force exploded outward. Blade felt it like being hit by a freight train wrapped in invisible fire. The telekinetic blast launched him across the plaza, his body crashing through a loading crane's support structure before slamming into a Duracrete wall hard enough to leave a man-shaped crater. His spine should have shattered. His ribs should have punctured lungs. His skull should have fractured. His healing factor processed the damage in seconds, bones resetting, organs regenerating, tissue knitting at a rate that defied medical science. Blade peeled himself from the wall, shook off debris, and started walking back toward the Inquisitor. The fifth brother was standing again, his yellow eyes wide with something approaching fear. Blade spat his blood, which meant internal damage that hadn't finished healing yet, and raised his sword. "I've survived worse. What are you?" The question came with different weight now, asked not in curiosity but in the dawning realization that the Inquisitorius protocols for handling Force sensitives didn't apply here. "A hunter." Blade advanced, his movements still predatory despite the injuries. "And your prey." The fifth brother's lightsaber spun to life in a defensive flourish, his training kicking in despite growing uncertainty. He'd interrogated Jedi, broken their spirits through torture and dark side corruption. He'd hunted Force sensitives across the galaxy, adapting his techniques to counter every lightsaber form in the archives. This was different. This was fighting something that treated his Force powers like environmental hazards to work around rather than overwhelming advantages to fear. Something that had survived injuries that should have killed it 3 times over and kept coming with mechanical inevitability. The fifth brother reached out with the Force, trying to sense Blade's intentions, to predict his next move through the web of destiny that connected all living things. Nothing. Not emptiness like he'd felt before that at least implied absence. A void where something should be. This was static. White noise. Blade's presence in the Force was like trying to read meaning in random quantum fluctuations. No future to predict. No intentions to sense. Just violence existing in the perpetual now. They clashed again, lightsaber meeting sword in a cascade of sparks that painted the plaza in red and silver light. The fifth brother used every technique the Inquisitorius had drilled into him, aggressive Juyo attacks to overwhelm, defensive Sorisu to buy time, acrobatic Ataru to create distance. He called on the Force to enhance his speed, his strength, his perception. Blade matched him step for step. Sword work that adapted mid-exchange, flowing from defensive to offensive in the space between heartbeats. Footwork that turned the debris-strewn plaza into tactical advantage, using destroyed cargo containers and burning wreckage as cover and weapons. When the fifth brother tried Force lightning blue-white energy that should have fried nerves and stopped hearts, Blade rolled behind a Durasteel beam, let the lightning scorch metal instead of flesh, and came back with a thrown knife that buried itself in the Inquisitor's shoulder. Not a vibroblade, not a modern weapon. A simple, archaic throwing knife with a silver edge that burned like acid where it pierced gray flesh. The fifth brother screamed, tearing the knife free, and felt his dark side healing struggle against whatever the blade had been coated with. Silver. Some primitive metal that reacted poorly with his hybrid physiology, a side effect of the dark side corruption that had transformed him from merely force-sensitive to something more monstrous. "What is that?" he demanded, cradling his shoulder. Blade drew another knife from his coat, then another, then a fourth, each blade gleaming silver in the firelight. "Works pretty good on anything that's not fully human anymore." The fifth brother's enhanced hearing caught the subtext. Anything like me. Anything like you. Understanding crystallized. This anomaly, this hunter, specialized in killing things that sat between natural and supernatural, human and monster. The silver weapons, the casual competence with lethal violence, the complete lack of hesitation when confronting obviously superior power. This wasn't a warrior, or a force-sensitive, or even a simple murderer. This was an exterminator. The Empire could use someone with your skills, the fifth brother said, buying time while his shoulder closed around silver poisoning. The Inquisitorius always needs effective operatives. Credits, resources, targets across the galaxy that need elimination. Blade's expression didn't change behind his cracked sunglasses. Not interested, then you'll die here. The fifth brother gathered the force, preparing for a final overwhelming assault. The Empire tolerates no threats. If you won't serve, you'll be eliminated. You're welcome to try. The fifth brother attacked with everything he had, force speed pushing his body beyond normal limitations. Lightsaber spinning in the deadly helicopter attack pattern the Inquisitorius favored, telekinesis, hurling debris from every angle to create an inescapable kill box. Blade went low. Under the spinning lightsaber, through the debris field, silver blade leading in a thrust that targeted the Inquisitor's already damaged knee. The fifth brother tried to jump, force-enhanced leap that should have carried him clear. Blade's sword found flesh anyway, the silver edge shearing through the knee joint completely. The Inquisitor fell, his severed lower leg hitting the plaza floor separately from his body. His lightsaber extinguished as concentration shattered, replaced by a scream that echoed across the industrial sector. The dark side surged in response to his agony, feeding his rage. But rage without mobility was just noise. Blade stood over him, sword point at the Inquisitor's throat, his breathing controlled despite injuries that were still healing. Your force didn't save you. Your empire can't protect you. Tell your masters something new came to the galaxy. The sword pressed harder, drawing a line of blood across gray skin. Tell them to stay out of my way. The fifth brother stared up at the figure silhouetted against Nar Shaddah's eternal neon haze, this impossible predator that had dismantled 43 trained soldiers and an Inquisitor in the span of an hour. His training screamed that he should use the Force to crush this anomaly's throat, to burn him with lightning, to kill him before he became a greater threat. But looking into those hidden eyes, past the cracked sunglasses to the barely restrained hunger beneath, the fifth brother understood a fundamental truth. He was already dead. The only question was whether his death served a purpose. "What are you?" he whispered. Blade's answer was simple. A reminder. There's always something worse than what you're afraid of. Then he turned and walked away, leaving the fifth brother alive to carry the message, his sword still clean, his coat still smoking from blaster burns. Behind him, the Inquisitor reached for his comlink with shaking hands, already composing the report that would reach Imperial intelligence within the hour, already knowing that what happened next would make this night's violence look like a warning shot. The anomaly had defeated an Inquisitor. Vader would want to know. Dryden Voss received the news of Black Sun's failed ambush while entertaining a Rhodian spice merchant in the First Light's observation lounge. The merchant was mid-sentence, explaining why his Kessel operation justified a 20% price increase, when Voss's lieutenant, a scarred human named Margot, leaned close and whispered 6 words that made everything else irrelevant. The anomaly killed an Imperial Inquisitor. Voss maintained his polite smile, nodded at something the Rhodian said, and stood with the fluid grace that made people forget he was one of the galaxy's most dangerous criminals until it was too late. My apologies, but urgent business requires my attention. Margot will finalize our arrangement. The Rodian sputtered protests. Margot's hand moved to her blaster. The Rodian fell silent. Voss walked to his private office with measured steps, waited until the door sealed, and then allowed his composure to crack. Not much, just enough to let the predatory excitement show in his eyes as he activated the holo projector. The footage was composite, pulled from multiple security feeds and Imperial surveillance drones. It showed a figure in a leather coat, moving with impossible speed through a kill zone designed to stop light armor. Showed him take blaster fire that should have vaporized flesh and keep fighting. Showed him crossblades with a force wielder and win. Voss watched it 3 times, his scarred face reflecting blue-white hologram light, his mind calculating possibilities. Crimson Dawn had been consolidating power in the galactic underworld for years, carefully staying beneath the Empire's notice while building networks that made the Hutts look provincial. Voss answered to Maul, the former Sith Lord who'd carved his own empire from Mandalore's ashes and refused to die despite being cut in half by a Jedi. Maul understood power in its purest form. Identify threats, neutralize them, or recruit them before anyone else did. This anomaly was all 3. A threat because anything that killed Inquisitors would attract Imperial attention that Crimson Dawn's operations couldn't afford. A target because leaving such a dangerous piece off the board invited chaos. And an opportunity because someone with those abilities, properly motivated, could be the weapon Crimson Dawn needed for the delicate work ahead. Maul had been specific in his recent orders. Find assets the Empire couldn't predict, couldn't counter with their force-wielding Inquisitors and overwhelming military might. Find weapons that existed outside the traditional power structures. This hunter blade, according to the fragmented reports coming from Nar Shaddah's underworld, existed so far outside traditional structures he might as well be from another galaxy, which, according to Imperial sensor logs, he literally was. Margot. Voss activated his comlink. Prepare my personal transport. We're going to Nar Shaddaa. Sir, that's Black Sun territory. Black Sun just lost 40 soldiers and their credibility in the same night. They'll negotiate or be replaced. Voss checked his reflection in the polished Durasteel wall, adjusting his jacket. Besides, I'm not going as a rival. I'm going as an interested party offering something Black Sun can't. What's that? Appreciation for artistry. Blade found a condemned warehouse in Nar Shaddaa's lower industrial sectors, 3 kilometers below the glittering entertainment districts where legitimate commerce pretended the moon's criminal foundation didn't exist. The structure was scheduled for demolition, its walls covered in corrosion and graffiti in 6 languages. Its interior stripped of anything valuable by scavengers. Perfect. He'd stitched his own wounds with supplies stolen from the clinic the blaster burns had mostly closed. But deep tissue damage required time even his healing factor couldn't shortcut. The synthesized serum was failing faster now. 6 hours per dose had become 4. Would be 3 after the next injection, then 2. Diminishing returns, spiraling toward inevitable conclusion. Without a stable solution, he had perhaps 2 days before the bloodlust became unmanageable. 2 days to either find whatever passed for pharmaceutical infrastructure in this galaxy, or embrace what he'd spent decades suppressing. Neither option was acceptable. Blade laid out his remaining equipment on a rusted cargo platform. 3 serum doses. His sword. 2 pistols with maybe 20 shots between them. Assorted knives, and a datapad he'd taken from one of the mercenaries. The device had provided crucial intelligence during his brief time in this galaxy language translation that let him communicate. Basic cultural information that explained the power structures, and most critically, confirmation that he was nowhere near Earth. Not another dimension, not another timeline, another galaxy entirely, tens of thousands of light years from anything familiar. In a universe where physics still worked but the fundamental rules had different addendums. The Force. Blade had spent hours reviewing data on this phenomenon. A mystical energy field that connected all living things, gave certain individuals supernatural abilities, and apparently had light, and dark sides that corresponded to philosophical alignments. The Jedi used it for peace and defense. The Sith used it for power and domination. And between them, an entire galaxy had been shaped by their cosmic chess game. It reminded him of vampire politics. Honestly, ancient powers playing games with mortal lives, convinced their superiority justified any atrocity, all while the regular people just tried to survive. His instincts said, stay out of it. Find a way home. Don't get involved in wars between space wizards and fascist empires. But that Inquisitor had mentioned something important. Vader would want to know. Blade's stolen data had information on Darth Vader, the Emperor's enforcer, the Empire's ultimate weapon, a fallen Jedi who'd slaughtered his former brothers and helped establish totalitarian rule across thousands of star systems. The files showed grainy footage of a figure in black armor and a flowing cape, breathing with mechanical rhythm, killing rebels with casual force applications. Powerful, dangerous, and according to the data, obsessed with hunting down remaining Jedi and Force sensitives, which meant if Vader took interest in the anomaly who'd defeated an Inquisitor, Blade would have limited time before the Empire's full attention crushed him. He needed allies, resources, information about this galaxy's power brokers and how to either exploit them or avoid them entirely. He needed impressive accommodations. The voice came from the warehouse entrance, smooth and cultured, carrying undertones of amusement. Though I'd have thought someone of your capabilities could afford better than condemned real estate. Blade's hand was on his sword before he consciously registered movement, his body pivoting toward the threat with predatory precision. A man stood, silhouetted in the doorway, human, well-dressed in clothes that screamed wealth and taste, his face marked with distinctive scars that looked ritualistic rather than accidental. Not alone. Blade's enhanced hearing caught 6 additional heartbeats positioned around the warehouse perimeter. Professional spacing. Disciplined breathing. These weren't Black Sun thugs or Imperial soldiers. These were specialists. You have 3 seconds to explain why you're not dead, Blade said, his voice flat. The scarred man raised empty hands in a gesture of peace, then slowly walked forward into the warehouse's dim lighting. My name is Dryden Voss. I represent an organization called Crimson Dawn, and I'm here to offer you something Black Sun and the Empire can't. Not interested in joining criminal organizations. I'm not offering membership. Voss stopped at a respectful distance, his posture relaxed but ready. I'm offering information, resources, and most importantly, discretion. You're new to this galaxy. You've made quite the impression, but impressions draw attention. Imperial attention. The kind that ends with a Star Destroyer in orbit, and Vader himself asking uncomfortable questions. Blade's expression didn't change, but Voss was perceptive enough to catch the microtell's slight tension in the shoulders that suggested the name Vader carried weight. You know who Vader is, Voss continued. Good. That means you understand the situation. The Inquisitor you maimed. He's already reported to Imperial intelligence. By tomorrow, your description will be flagged across every Imperial database in the sector. By next week, if you're particularly unfortunate, Vader will decide you're worth investigating personally. Let him come. Voss's scarred face split in a genuine smile. I believe you think that, but you don't understand what Vader is. He's not an Inquisitor. He's not even a particularly powerful Sith by historical standards. The smile faded. He's something worse. Focused, relentless, and absolutely loyal to an emperor who's orchestrated the galaxy's enslavement through decade-long manipulation. Blade studied the crime lord, his enhanced senses reading micro-expressions and heartbeat variations that revealed truth from lies. Voss believed what he was saying. More importantly, he was afraid not of Blade, but of this Vader. That kind of fear from someone who ran a criminal empire carried weight. What do you want? Blade asked. To offer you a choice. Voss activated a portable holoprojector, displaying a star map that meant nothing to Blade, but clearly showed territory divisions. Crimson Dawn operates in the spaces between Imperial control and criminal chaos. We have resources across hundreds of systems. Safe houses, medical facilities, information networks. The map shifted, highlighting specific locations. I can provide you with what you need to survive in this galaxy. In exchange, I ask for services rendered when our interests align. I don't work for crime lords. I'm not asking you to. Voss deactivated the projector. I'm asking you to recognize that in a galaxy controlled by an empire that murdered an entire religious order and enslaves worlds for profit, the line between criminal and freedom fighter is philosophical at best. Blade's jaw tightened. He'd heard similar arguments on Earth, the mob claiming they protected neighborhoods the cops ignored, cartels insisting they provided for communities governments abandoned. Usually it was bullshit justifying exploitation. But usually, vampire covens weren't murdering entire cities and the government wasn't run by fascist space wizards. What kind of services? Blade asked. The kind Black Sun and the Hutts can't handle. The kind the rebels are too principled to authorize. The kind that require someone who can kill an Inquisitor and walk away. Voss's voice lowered. You're a hunter. My organization occasionally requires things hunted. Specific targets who've outlived their usefulness or pose threats to operations. No civilian casualties, no innocents, just problems that need permanent solutions. Assassination, elimination of threats. Semantics matter less than outcomes. Blade considered it. His moral code had lines, but those lines had been drawn fighting supernatural monsters who preyed on innocence. If this galaxy's innocence included fascist enforcers and crime lords trafficking in sentient beings, the calculation changed. But trusting a criminal organization felt like playing Russian roulette with all chambers loaded. I need medical supplies, Blade said finally. Pharmaceutical grade, chemistry equipment, access to biological databases for cross-species medication synthesis. Done. I have facilities on 3 worlds that can provide that. I need information. Everything your organization knows about Imperial operations, Vader's capabilities, and ways off this moon without triggering every sensor in the sector. Also done, though Vader's full capabilities are classified even to intelligence networks. What I can provide, I will, and I need you to understand something. Blade's hand moved to his sword, not drawing it but making the threat explicit. If your organization traffics in slaves, exploits children, or preys on people who can't defend themselves, we're going to have a problem. The kind your 6 guards outside can't solve. Voss's expression flickered surprise at the accurate guard count, then calculation, then something approaching respect. Crimson Dawn's interests lie in profit and power, not barbarism. We deal in contraband, not sentence. We bribe officials, not brutalize civilians. My master has specific philosophies about strength and predation. Your master, someone you'll likely never meet, which is for the best. Voss extended his hand, the universal gesture of agreement transcending galaxies. Do we have an understanding? Blade looked at the offered hand, remembering every alliance he'd made with supernatural creatures who claimed to want peace while plotting betrayal. Remembered vampire councils promising cooperation right before trying to kill him. Remembered demons offering knowledge in exchange for freedom they'd use to slaughter innocents. But he also remembered Whistler, his mentor, who'd been a brutal killer before becoming Blade's only family. Remembered that survival sometimes meant working with people you didn't trust because the alternative was dying alone. He took Voss's hand, his grip controlled but strong enough to make the point that crushing bones remained an option. One job, Blade said. See if your resources are worth the price. Then we renegotiate. Voss's smile returned. I'll have transport ready within the hour. There's a facility on Ord Mantell Rim World, limited Imperial presence, excellent medical infrastructure. You'll have everything you need. And the job? Simple reconnaissance. Observation only. There's an Imperial officer on Ord Mantell who's been compromising Crimson Dawn operations. I need to know his patterns, his security, his vulnerabilities. Voss released Blade's hand. No killing required, just information. It sounded too easy, which meant complications would emerge. They always did. But Blade needed the resources, needed time to synthesize stable serum, needed breathing room before the Empire's full weight descended. "One job," he repeated. "One job," Vos agreed, already walking toward the exit. "Welcome to Crimson Dawn, Blade. Try not to kill too many of our assets." After the crime lord left, Blade remained in the abandoned warehouse, his enhanced hearing tracking the 6 guards' departure, his mind calculating odds and angles. He'd just made a deal with a criminal organization in a galaxy he didn't understand, based on trust he didn't have, for resources he desperately needed. Whistler would have called him an idiot. Whistler would also have done the exact same thing. Blade injected another dose of failing serum, feeling it buy him maybe 3 more hours of control, and began gathering his equipment. Then he'd decide if Crimson Dawn was useful or just another parasite that needed elimination. Either way, the galaxy's underworld was about to learn what Earth's vampires had learned the hard way. When you deal with Blade, you're not hiring a weapon. You're negotiating with a loaded gun pointed at your head. Ord Mantell's skies burned with the colors of industrial pollution and dying stars, orange and purple bruises against black space that made the planet look diseased even from orbit. Blade watched through the transport's viewport as they descended toward Worldport, the planet's primary city, a sprawling mess of legitimate commerce and black market dealings that made Nar Shaddaa look organized by comparison. The journey from the smuggler's moon had taken 18 hours through hyperspace, a form of faster-than-light travel that felt like having his molecules scattered across dimensional static and reassembled on the other side. His enhanced senses had screamed warnings the entire time, his hybrid physiology detecting wrongness in the way hyperspace interacted with biology. He'd spent most of the trip meditating, not the mystical kind these Force users practiced, but the practical kind that came from decades controlling bloodlust in close quarters. The serum was down to 2-hour effectiveness. He'd synthesized 2 more doses using equipment Voss provided, but the law of diminishing returns was accelerating. Soon he'd be injecting every hour, then every 30 minutes, until the compound became completely ineffective and the thirst took control. He needed the facility, Voss promised. Needed it soon. "We'll be landing in 5 minutes," the pilot announced. A Twi'lek female named Syndra who'd barely spoken during the flight. Her leku twitching in patterns Blade had learned indicated concentration. Professional. He respected that. Crimson Dawn maintains a medical facility in the warehouse district under the cover of a legitimate pharmaceutical distributor. No Imperial entanglements, no questions asked. Blade nodded, checking his equipment one final time. His sword remained faithful. His pistols were fully charged with power cells that were apparently universal across the galaxy, and his knives gleamed silver in the transport's interior lighting. He'd also acquired what the locals called a vibroblade, a combat knife with an ultrasonic vibration generator that let it cut through materials that would stop normal blades. Useful, though he preferred weapons he'd tested in actual combat. The transport touched down in a private hangar, its landing gear settling with barely a tremor. Vos had promised discretion, and so far, he'd delivered. No security sweeps, no customs inspections, no Imperial presence, asking uncomfortable questions about the dark-skinned human with archaic weapons who'd killed an Inquisitor. Syndra led him through corridors that smelled of machine oil and chemical compounds, past crates marked in languages Blade's translator couldn't parse, to a reinforced door that required biometric scanning. She placed her palm against the reader, spoke a passphrase in Hutez, and the door hissed open to reveal a laboratory that would have impressed pharmaceutical companies on Earth. "Everything you requested," Syndra said, gesturing to the equipment. Synthesizers, centrifuges, full chemical database with cross-species compatibility charts, biological samples from 200 species if you need comparative analysis. The facility's yours for as long as necessary. Blade walked through the lab, his enhanced senses cataloging equipment and supplies with professional efficiency. State-of-the-art by this galaxy's standards, which meant technology decades beyond anything he'd worked with on Earth. The database alone represented resources that would have taken him years to compile through vampire hunting networks. "The target?" Blade asked, already moving to the synthesizer station. Syndra activated a holoprojector, displaying the image of a human male in Imperial officer's uniform, mid-40s, scarred from what looked like combat injuries, eyes that carried the dead look of someone who'd seen too much violence and stopped caring. Captain Hendry Proul, Imperial intelligence liaison stationed at the garrison outside Worldport. He's been feeding information about Crimson Dawn operations to his superiors, compromising 3 smuggling routes and 2 safe houses in the past month. Security detail, 6 stormtroopers rotating shifts, plus whatever garrison support he can call in. He maintains an apartment in the officers' district, 4th level, building overlooking the garrison plaza. Rarely leaves except for official business. When he's vulnerable, whether he's working alone or part of a larger Imperial operation against Crimson Dawn. Observation only, Blade confirmed. No elimination, unless necessary. Correct. Though if elimination becomes necessary. Syndra met his eyes, her red skin darkening slightly. Vos authorized full discretion. Blade filed that away. It meant Voss wanted the officer dead but wouldn't order it directly. Plausible deniability. Smart, in a criminal sort of way. It also meant this simple reconnaissance was actually an assassination audition. Crimson Dawn testing whether their new asset could handle wet work with Imperial targets. Fine. Let them test. Blade had been hunted by vampire covens, demon cults, and supernatural organizations with centuries of practice at elimination. Imperial intelligence would need to bring more than 6 stormtroopers to present a real challenge. I'll need 12 hours, Blade said, already pulling up the biological database on the synthesizer's interface. Get me detailed maps of the officer's district, security camera blind spots, and garrison response times for that sector, already uploaded to your datapad. Syndra moved toward the exit. I'll be in the hangar if you need anything. Otherwise, you're operating independently. Crimson Dawn has no official presence on Ord Mantell. She left, the reinforced door sealing behind her with the solid thunk of durasteel and circumstance. Blade was alone in the facility with equipment worth more than most people saw in a lifetime, and a job that would either prove Crimson Dawn's resources were worth the compromise or demonstrate that criminal alliances were suicide, regardless of galaxy. He got to work. The next 12 hours passed in focused intensity as Blade systematically rebuilt his serum from first principles. This galaxy's biochemistry was different. Alien species had evolved along separate paths. Their medications designed for physiologies that ranged from silicon-based to insectoid to pure energy beings. But chemistry was chemistry. Neurotransmitters followed predictable patterns. Adrenal systems, regardless of species, operated on similar principles. Blade cross-referenced humanoid species data human, Zabrak, Twi'lek, Mirialan, looking for commonalities in their adrenal suppressants and neurochemical inhibitors. He synthesized test batches, analyzed their molecular structures, adjusted ratios to account for his hybrid metabolism. Some compounds his body rejected immediately, triggering healing responses that flushed them from his system in minutes. Others showed promise, dampening the thirst without the rapid diminishing returns of his previous attempts. By hour 8, he'd created something stable. By hour 10, he'd tested it on himself and confirmed 4-hour effectiveness with minimal degradation. By hour 12, he had enough doses to last 3 weeks if he rationed carefully. Enough time to complete this job. Enough time to evaluate whether Crimson Dawn was useful or dangerous. Enough time to decide his next move in a galaxy that seemed determined to pull him into wars he had no stake in. Blade injected the new serum, feeling it spread through his system with the cool efficiency of properly balanced chemistry. The thirst receded to its familiar background, whisper present but manageable, a reminder of what he was without defining what he'd become. Control. Always control. He secured the remaining doses in a tactical case, gathered his weapons, and reviewed the intelligence Syndra had provided. Captain Proul's apartment was a fortress in miniature reinforced walls, security systems, multiple exit routes, but fortresses had weaknesses. Guards got complacent. Patterns emerged over time, and Blade had decades of experience finding gaps in defenses that looked impenetrable. The officers' district existed 5 kilometers from the warehouse facility, accessible through Worldport's chaotic transit system, or on foot through industrial sectors where cameras were sparse and witnesses were scarce. Blade chose foot travel. Cameras could be avoided. Witnesses could be managed. And his enhanced senses functioned better when he could read the environment directly. Ord Mantell, after dark, was organized chaos. Legitimate workers streaming from factories toward residential districts. Smugglers conducting business in alleys that smelled of ozone and desperation. Security patrols operating on predictable routes that suggested corruption had long since replaced efficiency. Blade moved through it like smoke, his presence noticed but not remembered, his leather coat and sunglasses marking him as dangerous enough to avoid but not worth reporting. The officer's district was different. Clean streets, functioning lighting, stormtrooper patrols that actually maintained discipline. This was Imperial territory, carved from Ord Mantell's criminal foundations and maintained through force and fear. Citizens here walked quickly, eyes down, conversations muted. Fear was a universal language, and Blade spoke it fluently. He found vantage points: a condemned building across from Prule's apartment complex, a rooftop with clear sightlines to the Garrison Plaza, an alley that offered escape routes in 3 directions. His enhanced vision tracked patrol patterns, counted guards, noted shift changes. By midnight, he had a complete picture of the security apparatus, professional but not paranoid, disciplined but not creative. They expected threats to come from criminal organizations using standard tactics, bribes, explosives, long-range assassination. They weren't prepared for something that could scale 4 stories of Duracrete in seconds, infiltrate through ventilation systems too small for normal humans, and operate in complete silence. They weren't prepared for Blade. He watched Captain Prule through the apartment's windows. The officer moved with military precision, even in private. His quarters Spartan and organized, his behavior suggesting someone who expected attack and lived accordingly. Former special forces, maybe. Or just paranoid enough to survive in a galaxy where betrayal was standard operating procedure. Blade spent 6 hours observing. Prule maintained no pattern. His movements through the apartment varied each time. His sleep schedule irregular. His security checks randomized enough to defeat pattern recognition. Smart. This wasn't some bureaucrat playing soldier. This was someone trained to survive in hostile territory, which made him dangerous, which made the mission interesting. As dawn approached, Blade withdrew to his staging area and compiled his observations. Prule was alone, no collaborators, no additional intelligence officers operating from the apartment. He maintained communication with the garrison through encrypted channels, but the encryption was standard Imperial grade, nothing suggesting special operations or black projects. He left the apartment twice in 12 hours, both times with full security detail, traveling directly to the garrison and returning within 2 hours. Vulnerable moments. Early morning, when security shift changed. Late evening, when he showered the apartment's layout, put the refresher in the interior, away from windows, requiring approach through the main entrance. And the garrison itself, where Prule occasionally worked late in offices that, according to building schematics, had limited security compared to the main complex. Blade could kill him easily, walk through the shift change, enter the apartment during the 30-second gap when old guards left and new guards arrived, eliminate the target with a blade to the brainstem before he could trigger alarms. Clean, professional, effective. But Voss had said observation only. Information gathering. Which meant this was a test. Could Blade follow orders that contradicted his nature as a hunter? Could he exercise restraint when violence was the easier solution? The answer was yes, because Blade had spent 40 years exercising restraint against bloodlust that screamed for violence every second of every day. Compared to that, not killing one Imperial officer was easy. He contacted Syndra through the encrypted comlink she'd provided. Pattern analysis complete. Target operates alone. Standard Imperial encryption. Vulnerable during shift changes and late evening. No indication of broader operation. Syndra's response came immediately. Voss is pleased. He'd like you to continue observation for another 48 hours. Confirmation of patterns. Blade considered refusing. 48 more hours on Ord Mantell meant 48 more hours where something could go wrong, where his presence might trigger Imperial attention. where complications would emerge because they always did. But it also meant more time to refine his serum, more time to assess Crimson Dawn's reliability, more time to learn this galaxy's rules before committing to anything irreversible. "Confirmed," Blade said, continuing observation. He settled into the condemned building's shadows, his enhanced senses tracking Prull's movements across the distance, his mind cataloging information while his body remained absolutely still. This was familiar territory, the patient hunter's vigil, waiting for the perfect moment that might never come, comfortable in the knowledge that patience was its own weapon. Below, Worldport continued its chaotic dance of legitimate commerce and criminal enterprise. Above, Ord Mantell's polluted sky burned with colors that reminded Blade of wounds that wouldn't heal. And somewhere in the garrison, Captain Prull lived his careful life, unaware that something from outside his galaxy had marked him. Not for death. Not yet, but marked nonetheless. The complication arrived on the second night of observation, descending from orbit in a Lambda-class shuttle that cut through Ord Mantell's atmosphere like a dagger through flesh. Blade watched it from his vantage point, his enhanced vision tracking the craft's trajectory toward the Imperial garrison, with the certainty of someone who'd learned to recognize predators by their approach. The shuttle bore no standard markings, no unit designations, no identification codes visible to civilian sensors. Just polished black armor plating that drank light and promised violence. Blade's instincts screamed warnings before his rational mind processed why. The garrison's response confirmed it. Stormtrooper patrols doubled immediately. Officers emerged from the complex, moving with the rigid terror of soldiers who'd just learned their gods were visiting. The landing platform, normally reserved for supply transports and patrol craft, was cleared in under 3 minutes, personnel scrambling to prepare for arrival. Someone important was coming, someone who made Imperial officers afraid. Blade pulled up the stolen datapad, cross-referencing shuttle configurations against the intelligence database Crimson Dawn had provided. Lambda-class shuttles were standard Imperial transports, used for everything from troop deployment to executive travel. But this particular configuration, the enhanced armor plating, the lack of identifying marks, the garrison's terrified response matched only one profile in the database: personal transport for high-priority Imperial command, Inquisitorius. Or worse. The shuttle landed with mechanical precision, its boarding ramp extending to reveal a figure that made every instinct Blade possessed scream to run. 7 feet of black armor and flowing cape, breathing with mechanical rhythm that echoed across the garrison plaza like a death drum. His presence distorted the air around him, not visibly, but in a way Blade's enhanced senses detected as pressure, as wrongness, as reality bending around concentrated malevolence. Darth Vader had arrived. Blade had seen the grainy footage, had read the intelligence reports describing the Emperor's enforcer as a fallen Jedi turned ultimate weapon. The data hadn't prepared him for the physical reality. This wasn't just a man in armor. This was violence given form, wrapped in technology, and whatever this galaxy called supernatural power, walking with the absolute certainty of something that had killed so many times that mercy had become a forgotten language. Imperial officers prostrated themselves. Stormtroopers stood at perfect attention, their body language screaming fear despite concealing helmets. And Captain Prull, Blade's surveillance target, the careful professional who varied his patterns and lived like someone expecting assassination, walked forward to meet Vader with the resigned expression of a man attending his own execution. Blade's enhanced hearing picked up fragments of conversation across 200 meters. "Report was concerning, Captain. Anomaly defeated the 5th brother, my lord. Describe this creature." Blade's jaw tightened. They were talking about him. The 5th brother had filed his report, and somehow it had reached Vader quickly enough for the Sith Lord to personally investigate. That suggested either the Inquisitor's failure was significant enough to warrant immediate attention, or Vader's interest in Force-related anomalies went beyond standard Imperial protocol. Neither option was promising. "Escape to Ord Mantell, my lord." Intelligence suggests. Vader's hand moved, not a gesture of violence, just a slight raising of his palm. Captain Prull's next words died in a choking gasp as his hands flew to his throat, clawing at invisible pressure. The captain's face turned purple, his eyes bulging. his body lifted 6 inches off the ground. By nothing Blade could see, but could feel that same distortion. In reality, he'd sensed from the fifth brother, magnified 100-fold. Telekinesis, force choking. Vader was killing Prul for the crime of providing incomplete intelligence. Blade's hand moved to his sword instinctively. Not to intervene, getting involved in Imperial executions was suicide, and Prul was an intelligence officer complicit in maintaining fascist control. But the casual cruelty of it, the demonstration of power, purely to reinforce fear, triggered responses. Blade had developed hunting vampires who killed for sport. Prul dropped, gasping, alive but traumatized. Vader turned away as if the man had ceased to exist, addressing the garrison commander with mechanical breathing, punctuating his words like a countdown to doom. Mobilize all available units. This anomaly is somewhere in Worldport. Find it. Capture it if possible. Eliminate it if necessary. I will personally interrogate any being who claims knowledge of its whereabouts. The garrison exploded into activity. Stormtroopers assembled in formation. Speeders launched from vehicle bays. The entire Imperial presence on Ord Mantell had just been mobilized for one target. For Blade, time to leave. Blade withdrew from his vantage point with practiced silence, his enhanced senses tracking patrol patterns and camera positions as he moved through Worldport's industrial sectors. The garrison's mobilization was efficient but predictable. They were flooding the streets with personnel, establishing checkpoints at major intersections, and likely shutting down spaceport access within the hour. Standard containment protocol, effective against most targets. Useless against someone who'd evaded vampire hunting networks across 4 continents and multiple dimensions. But Vader was different. The fifth brother had been dangerous, trained, powerful, committed. Vader was something else entirely. The footage Blade had reviewed showed the Sith Lord killing Jedi with casual gestures, surviving explosions that should have vaporized him, and wielding that force power with precision that suggested decades of practice. Fighting Vader would be suicide. Running was survival. Blade reached the Crimson Dawn facility within 20 minutes, moving through back alleys and maintenance corridors that civilian sensors didn't cover. Syndra was already preparing the transport for immediate departure, her Leku twitching in patterns that suggested fear poorly concealed. "Vader's here," she said. Unnecessary confirmation. "We need to leave. Now." Agreed. "Where's Voss?" "Already en route to the Outer Rim." He sent new orders aboard observation. "Extract immediately. Rendezvous at safe house coordinates." "I'm uploading to your data pad." Syndra's hands moved across the transport's control panel with practiced speed. Crimson Dawn's pulling all assets from Ord Mantell. If Vader's conducting a personal investigation, nowhere on this planet is safe. Blade secured his equipment, his mind already calculating angles. Vader's arrival meant the Empire knew he was on Ord Mantell, which meant someone had provided intelligence. The fifth brother's report would have mentioned Nar Shaddaa, but tracking him to Ord Mantell required either surveillance Blade hadn't detected or information from someone who knew Crimson Dawn's operations. A leak. "Did Voss know Vader was coming?" Blade asked, his tone casual but his hand near his sword. Syndra's hesitation was answer enough. He suspected Imperial interest might escalate. He didn't anticipate this level of response. Translation. Voss had used Blade as bait, drawing Imperial attention to test their response patterns while maintaining plausible deniability. Smart. Ruthless. Exactly what Blade should have expected from a criminal organization playing chess with an empire. The question was whether to kill Syndra for complicity or save the confrontation with Voss for when he had more information and better positioning. Survival won out. He could kill Crimson Dawn later if necessary. "Get us off this planet," Blade said, settling into the transport's passenger compartment. Fast. Syndra initiated launch protocols, the transport's engines humming to life with power signatures that would light up every sensor in the garrison. They had maybe 3 minutes before interceptors scrambled, maybe 5 before the garrison's anti-air batteries locked targeting solutions. The transport lifted off, accelerating toward the upper atmosphere with thrust that pressed Blade into his seat despite compensating inertial dampeners. Through the viewport, he watched Worldport recede, saw the garrison's searchlights sweep the district his vantage point had occupied, saw patrol speeders converging on the industrial sector, saw the entire planet's Imperial apparatus mobilizing for him. Incoming! Syndra's warning came simultaneously with proximity alarms screaming through the cockpit. 2 TIE fighters had launched from the garrison, their distinctive twin-engine scream closing the distance with speed that made atmospheric speeders look stationary. Blade grabbed the co-pilot's harness as Syndra threw the transport into evasive maneuvers, the craft's frame groaning under stress it wasn't designed to handle. Red laser fire stitched the sky around them, turbo laser bolts that would have vaporized the transport if they'd connected. "We're not going to outrun them." Syndra's voice carried the edge of panic poorly suppressed. "Atmospheric speeds favor fighters, not transports. We need hyperspace coordinates locked?" Blade interrupted, his enhanced reflexes tracking the TIE fighter's approach vector. "Yes, but we need to clear the gravity well first, and they'll— How long to the gravity threshold?" 90 seconds at current acceleration. The TIE fighters were closing, their targeting computers probably painting the transport with weapon locks that would culminate in destruction. Blade unbuckled from his harness and moved to the transport's emergency hatch, a maintenance access point that opened to vacuum and atmosphere in situations where rapid boarding was necessary. "What are you doing?" Syndra demanded. "Buying time. Keep us steady for 5 seconds when I tell you." "That's insane." The wind shear alone, 5 seconds. Then, evasive maneuvers and full acceleration. Blade positioned himself at the hatch, one hand on the emergency release, his enhanced physiology already adapting to the lower oxygen levels as they climbed toward the upper atmosphere. The TIE fighters were 200 meters behind, closing fast, their pilots likely assuming the transport would either surrender or die in the next 30 seconds. They were wrong. "Now!" Blade shouted. Syndra leveled the transport. Blade opened the hatch. Wind exploded through the compartment with force that would have ripped a normal human into the screaming void. Blade's enhanced strength let him hold position, his body angled against the slipstream, his hand drawing one of his pistols with mechanical precision. The TIE fighters were in perfect formation, closing for the kill, their pilots focused on weapon targeting and probably not expecting their prey to open fire back with personal weapons. Blade aimed for the lead fighter's cockpit viewport, a tiny target at this distance, at this speed, with wind shear that made precision shooting theoretically impossible. He fired 3 times. The first shot went wide, dispersed by atmospheric distortion. The second hit the TIE's solar panel, superheating the metal but causing no critical damage. The third fired with Blade's enhanced reflexes compensating for wind speed, atmospheric density, and the fighter's velocity punched through the cockpit viewport. The TIE fighter exploded as its power cell ruptured, the fireball consuming its wingman in sympathetic detonation. Both fighters tumbled from the sky in burning fragments that painted Ord Mantell's polluted atmosphere with new colors. Blade pulled himself back into the transport, sealed the hatch, and returned to his seat as if shooting down Imperial fighters with a pistol while hanging from a flying transport was routine. Syndra stared at him, her red skin pale with shock. That was 30 seconds to gravity threshold, Blade said, checking his pistol's charge. "They'll scramble more fighters. Keep accelerating." Syndra's hands moved across the controls with renewed focus, fear temporarily overridden by professional competence. The transport screamed through the upper atmosphere, its hull glowing from friction, its structural integrity warnings flashing across displays. Blade couldn't fully interpret but understood meant they were pushing limits. The stars appeared above real stars, not the polluted haze of planetary atmosphere, and the transport's navigation computer chimed confirmation. Gravity threshold cleared. Jumping to hyperspace in 3, 2, 1. Reality twisted. The universe stretched like taffy, stars becoming lines of light, space itself folding around impossibility. Blade's enhanced senses screamed warnings as his body experienced something biology had never evolved to process. Then they were through, traveling faster than light through the dimensional static called hyperspace, leaving Ord Mantell and Darth Vader behind. For now, Blade leaned back in his seat, his breathing controlled, his mind already processing what the encounter meant. Vader had come personally. That level of response suggested either the Emperor himself had taken interest, or Vader's obsession with Force anomalies went deeper than intelligence reports indicated. Either way, Blade had graduated from interesting anomaly to priority target. The Empire would keep hunting. Vader would keep coming. And somewhere in the distance, watching through sensors and informant networks and the invisible web of criminal intelligence, Crimson Dawn was learning exactly how dangerous their new asset was, and whether that danger pointed at the Empire or at them. Syndra's voice broke the silence, quiet and carrying weight. Voss wants to meet. Says he has information about what just happened. I'm sure he does. And he says to tell you that Crimson Dawn's master is interested in speaking with you directly. Blade's eyes, hidden behind sunglasses that had survived atmospheric re-entry and TIE fighter engagement, fixed on nothing in particular. Crimson Dawn's master, the one Voss had mentioned but never named. Someone important enough that even a crime lord spoke of them with careful respect. Set the coordinates, Blade said. Let's see what kind of monster runs this organization. Because Blade had learned an ancient truth across decades of hunting. When you dealt with criminals, you always dealt with monsters eventually. The only question was whether you killed them first. The safe house existed on Dathomir, a planet that made every instinct Blade possessed scream warnings from the moment they entered orbit. The world below was shrouded in perpetual mist, its surface covered in tangled forests that looked simultaneously dead and viciously alive. Red fog rolled across landscapes that bore the scars of ancient violence, and even from space, Blade could feel something wrong about the planet. Not wrong like dimensional rifts or vampire feeding grounds. Wrong like the planet itself was watching, hungry, and aware. Dathomir, Syndra said, her voice tight with poorly concealed fear as she guided the transport through atmospheric entry. Homeworld of the Night Sisters, Force wielders who practice different traditions than Jedi or Sith, dark magics, blood rituals. The Empire mostly leaves this place alone because even stormtroopers don't survive here long. Your boss picked a hell of a meeting place. It's not Voss's choice. This is his master's territory. Syndra's Leku twitched in patterns that suggested she was deeply uncomfortable. I've never been here before. Most Crimson Dawn operatives haven't. The master keeps this location secret for good reason. The transport descended through red mist that clung to the hull like grasping fingers, breaking through into a clearing surrounded by twisted trees that looked like they'd been grown specifically to create nightmares. Ancient stone structures dotted the landscape, temples or fortresses, impossible to tell which, their architecture suggesting civilizations that had understood violence as art form. A single landing platform jutted from the largest structure, carved from black stone that drank light and radiated cold despite Dathomir's humid atmosphere. Two figures waited on the platform, Dryden Voss in his immaculate suit that looked absurdly civilized against the savage backdrop, and someone else, something else. The second figure stood shorter than Voss, wrapped in dark robes that concealed details, but Blade's enhanced senses immediately cataloged threat indicators that made the fifth brother and even Vader seem quantifiable by comparison. The figure's heartbeat was wrong, two hearts beating in synchronized rhythm, blood flow that suggested redundant circulatory systems, and underneath it all, that same pressure distortion, Blade associated with Force users, amplified to levels that made reality feel thin. The transport touched down. Syndra remained in the cockpit, her body language making clear she had no intention of leaving the relative safety of the craft. Smart woman. Blade descended the boarding ramp with his hand near his sword, his enhanced senses mapping every sight line, every potential ambush point, every exit route. The platform offered nowhere to run, 20 meters of carved stone surrounded by forest that looked carnivorous. If this was a trap, it was an elegant one. Voss stepped forward, his scarred face arranged in a welcoming expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. Blade, thank you for coming. I apologize for the complications on Ord Mantell. Imperial response was more aggressive than anticipated. You used me as bait. Blade's voice carried no accusation, just statement of fact. Drew Vader out to see how the Empire would respond to reports about me. Voss's smile flickered. I prefer to think of it as gathering intelligence while accomplishing necessary objectives. Captain Prule's patterns are now documented, and we've confirmed the Empire considers you a priority threat. That information has value. To who? The robed figure spoke, and Blade's enhanced hearing caught undertones in the voice that suggested vocal cords damaged beyond human normal, raspy, mechanical, carrying harmonics that implied technology merged with biology. To me, I am Maul, and you are the most interesting anomaly this galaxy has seen in 1,000 years. The robes shifted, revealing a face that made Blade's threat assessment spike into critical ranges. Red and black tattoos covered Zabrak features, twisted by pain and rage into something beyond standard humanoid. Yellow eyes burned with focused hatred that had been refined over decades into cold calculation. And below the waist, where legs should be, cybernetic replacements of black metal moved with predatory grace that suggested the prosthetics were weapons as much as mobility aids. This was Crimson Dawn's master, former Sith Lord, survivor of being cut in half by a Jedi, and according to the data Blade had reviewed, one of the most dangerous Force users alive. "You know who I am," Maul said, not a question, but a statement weighted with certainty. "You've researched. Good. Intelligence is survival, but data doesn't convey the full picture, does it? You look at me and see a threat. I look at you and see something that shouldn't exist." Blade's hand remained near his sword. "That makes two of us." Maul's laugh was sharp and humorless. Direct. "I appreciate that. The Jedi would have pontificated about the will of the Force. The Sith would have postured about power. You simply acknowledge the threat and calculate whether you can win." His yellow eyes narrowed. "Can you? Against you? Don't know. Haven't fought you yet." "Yet." Maul savored the word. Confidence, based on demonstrated capability. "You defeated the fifth brother, a trained Inquisitor with years of experience hunting Jedi. You survived an encounter with Darth Vader's attention, which kills most beings before they realize their targets. And you did it all without the Force, using only physical capability and tactical intelligence." The former Sith Lord began circling, his cybernetic legs moving with unsettling silence against stone that should have echoed. Blade turned with him, maintaining facing, his enhanced senses tracking Voss's position peripherally while keeping primary focus on the greater threat. "I've spent decades studying power," Maul continued, his voice carrying the weight of obsession. "The Force, technology, politics, violence, all tools to achieve dominance in a galaxy that respects only strength. And then you appear a being from outside our reality, carrying abilities that have no place in our understanding, yet functioning with brutal efficiency. You want to know what I am. I know what you are. A hybrid, human and something else, merged in ways that give you supernatural capability while maintaining tactical intelligence. A vampire, by your world's terminology, a predator evolved to hunt predators." Maul stopped circling, facing Blade directly. "What I want to know is whether you can be an asset, or if you're merely another threat to be eliminated." Blade's jaw tightened. "I don't work for Sith Lords. I'm not a Sith Lord anymore. That title died when my master betrayed me, when Kenobi cut me in half and left me for dead, when I spent years in madness before clawing my way back to sanity through pure hatred." Maul's voice carried bitterness, refined into weapon-grade focus. "I am something else now. A survivor. A revolutionary. Someone who understands that the Sith and Jedi both failed because they were obsessed with philosophy while ignoring practical reality. And your practical reality involves running a criminal empire. My practical reality involves building power structures outside Imperial control, creating networks that can survive when the Emperor's vision inevitably collapses under its own tyranny." Maul gestured to the ancient structures surrounding them. "This galaxy is broken. The Republic failed. The Empire is failing. The Jedi are extinct. The Sith serve a master who's orchestrated galactic enslavement through deception. Everything burns, and from the ashes, I will forge something better." Blade had heard similar speeches from vampire lords justifying their feeding territories, from demon princes explaining why their hell dimensions were necessary, from supernatural threats across 100 cities insisting their domination was inevitable. The words changed. The underlying hunger for power never did. "Why tell me this?" Blade asked. "Why not just try to kill me or recruit me through the usual threats and bribes? Because you're not from this galaxy. You have no stake in our wars. No allegiance to Jedi philosophy or Sith tradition. No loyalty to the Empire or rebellion. You're free in ways beings born here can never be, and that freedom makes you dangerous to everyone, including yourself. Get to the point." Maul's laugh returned, darker this time. "The point is that Vader is hunting you. The Empire has flagged you as a priority threat. Within weeks, every bounty hunter, Inquisitor, and Imperial garrison in the galaxy will have your description. You can't hide. You can't run forever. And you certainly can't fight the Empire alone. So you're offering protection in exchange for service. I'm offering alliance. Temporary if you prefer. You help me with operations the Empire doesn't expect. Targets that require capabilities Force users can't counter. In exchange, Crimson Dawn provides resources, intelligence, and most importantly, a network that can move you through the galaxy without triggering Imperial sensors." Maul extended his hand, a gesture that looked almost human, despite the cybernetic body. "Separately, Vader crushes us both." Blade studied the offered hand, his enhanced senses reading micro-expressions and biological tells that revealed truth beneath Maul's words. The former Sith Lord believed what he was saying, believed the Empire would eventually fall, believed Crimson Dawn represented genuine opposition, believed Blade could be useful. But underneath the belief was something else. Hunger. Not for blood like Blade's thirst, but for validation. For proof that his decades of suffering and survival had purpose. For revenge against a galaxy that had broken him and refused to acknowledge his resurrection. Maul was damaged. Dangerous. All of which made him either the perfect ally or the perfect enemy. "One condition," Blade said, not taking the hand yet. "You tell me why Vader's so interested in me." The Fifth Brother's report wouldn't have triggered this level of response. "There's something else." Maul's expression flickered surprise at the perception, then calculation, then something approaching respect. He lowered his hand. "Perceptive. Yes, there's more. Vader's interest in Force anomalies isn't academic, it's personal. He believes his children died when his wife died, but rumors persist that they survived. Every Force-sensitive anomaly, every unexplained disturbance, every being that shouldn't exist becomes a potential lead he must investigate. I'm not his kid, obviously, but you represent something Vader's spent years searching for proof that the galaxy contains mysteries even the Emperor's intelligence networks can't explain. Proof that power exists outside the Sith and Jedi tradition, and most dangerously, proof that his master's control isn't absolute." Maul's yellow eyes glinted. "You threaten Vader's worldview. That makes you his obsession." Blade processed this. A fascist enforcer with family trauma and daddy issues, hunting anything that suggested his superiors weren't omnipotent. "And if I refuse your alliance? Then you'll die within a month. Maybe 2 if you're particularly skilled at evasion. Vader is relentless. He'll track you across the galaxy, mobilize entire fleets to corner you, and eventually, he'll succeed." Maul's voice carried absolute certainty. "I've fought him. I know what he's capable of. You're dangerous, Blade, but Vader is inevitability wearing armor." The wind picked up across the platform, carrying with it the smell of Dathomir's strange flora and the underlying scent of old violence soaked into stone. Blade's enhanced senses caught movement in the forest creatures that weren't quite animal, presences that felt more like organized hunger than wildlife. This planet wanted them gone. "I'll work with Crimson Dawn," Blade said finally. "Temporary alliance. But understand something, if your organization traffics in slaves, exploits the helpless, or crosses lines I won't tolerate, the alliance ends. Violently." Maul studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Crimson Dawn's interests lie in power and profit, not casual cruelty. We're not the Empire. We don't enslave worlds for ideology. He extended his hand again. We have an accord. Blade took the hand. Maul's grip was strong, his cybernetic enhancements providing pressure that would have crushed normal human bones. Blade matched it, his hybrid strength meeting technology in a test of dominance neither fully won. They released simultaneously. Voss will provide your first assignment, Maul said, turning toward the temple. Something appropriate for your capabilities. Something that will make the Empire bleed and prove your value to our organization. He paused at the entrance. Welcome to Crimson Dawn, Daywalker. Try not to disappoint me. The former Sith Lord disappeared into darkness that seemed eager to consume him. Voss approached, his expression carefully neutral. Well, that went better than expected. He's insane, Blade said flatly. Undoubtedly, but his insanity is focused, calculated, and backed by resources that make him one of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. We'll return to civilized space and discuss your first operation. Something involving Imperial interests and targets that deserve their fate. Blade followed, his mind already calculating angles and exits. He'd just allied with a criminal organization led by a revenge-obsessed cyborg Sith Lord in a galaxy where a mechanized fascist with daddy issues was hunting him personally, while his only alternative was dying alone in a universe that wasn't his. Whistler would have laughed at the absurdity. Whistler also would have made the same call, because in the end, survival meant adapting, meant using whatever tools were available, meant becoming the monster just long enough to kill the bigger monsters. Blade had spent 40 years walking that edge. One more galaxy wouldn't make the difference. The Imperial research facility on Scarif's northern continent was a monument to the Empire's arrogance. 6 square kilometers of reinforced duracrete and sensor arrays, housing 300 scientists, 200 security personnel, and experimental weapons development that officially didn't exist. It sat on a tropical coastline where turquoise water met white sand, a paradise turned into a fortress where intelligence operatives developed tools for oppression. Blade studied it from 2 kilometers offshore, treading water that should have been cold but registered as merely cool to his enhanced physiology. His rebreather, a compact device that converted water to oxygen through technology he didn't fully understand but appreciated, allowed him to remain submerged for hours while observing patrol patterns and security rotations. The mission was simple: infiltrate the facility, eliminate Dr. Saren Octavius, a weapon designer responsible for creating nerve gas variants specifically tailored to non-human species, and destroy his research. No witnesses, no evidence. Make it look like an accident if possible, a rebel attack if necessary. Crimson Dawn's intelligence suggested Octavius had designed chemical weapons that had already been deployed on 3 worlds, killing civilian populations wholesale while leaving infrastructure intact for Imperial occupation. Genocide through chemistry. Efficient, monstrous, and according to Voss, only the beginning of what the doctor planned. Blade had spent 3 days confirming the intelligence, cross-referencing Imperial data leaks with rebel intelligence reports and independent sources. Everything checked out. Octavius was a monster wearing a lab coat, his brilliance dedicated to creating new ways to exterminate species the Empire deemed undesirable, the kind of target Blade specialized in eliminating. He'd memorized the facility's layout through stolen schematics, security checkpoints positioned every 50 meters, automated turrets covering approach vectors, multiple redundant alarm systems, and a garrison of stormtroopers who actually maintained proper discipline. Professional installation. Properly defended. Inadequate against someone who could hold his breath for 20 minutes, swim at speeds that outpaced patrol boats, and had spent decades infiltrating supernatural strongholds that made Imperial security look amateur by comparison. Blade submerged, swimming toward the facility's coastal wall with powerful strokes that left minimal wake. His enhanced vision compensated for darkness and water distortion, tracking security spotlights and underwater sensors. The Empire had invested in perimeter defense, but most of their budget went to aerial and ground approaches. Underwater infiltration wasn't standard rebel tactics, which meant security protocols were theoretical rather than tested. Their mistake. The facility's seawall extended 3 meters below water, its Duracrete construction rated to withstand explosive charges and sustained blaster fire. Blade surfaced in the shadow of a maintenance grate, 30 centimeters of reinforced metal, designed to prevent large objects from entering the facility's water intake system. His vibroblade cut through it in 40 seconds, the ultrasonic frequencies turning reinforced metal into butter. The maintenance tunnel beyond was cramped, barely large enough for a human to crawl through, designed for droid maintenance rather than personnel access. Perfect. Blade pulled himself into the tunnel, his enhanced strength making the awkward maneuvering merely uncomfortable rather than impossible. Water flowed past him toward intake processors that would recycle it into the facility's freshwater supply. He followed it upstream, navigating by enhanced senses and the subtle temperature variations that indicated proximity to different facility sections. The tunnel opened into a water processing chamber, automated machinery humming in darkness. No personnel because droids handled routine maintenance. Blade emerged from the water like something primordial, his leather coat dripping, his weapons checked and ready. The facility's interior blueprints were etched into his memory. This chamber connected to maintenance corridors that accessed every major section, including the research wing where Octavius worked. He moved through shadows like he was born to them, his enhanced senses tracking heartbeats and footsteps through walls, mapping security patrols before encountering them. A pair of stormtroopers passed within 3 meters, their conversation about shift rotation and weekend leave, completely unaware that death stood 10 feet away behind ventilation equipment. Blade let them pass. No unnecessary kills. Not yet. The research wing required biometric access retinal scanners, palm prints, security codes that changed daily. Blade bypassed it by climbing through ventilation shafts that maintenance droids used, his enhanced strength and flexibility allowing navigation through spaces that would have trapped normal humans. The shafts were monitored by motion sensors, but those sensors calibrated for droid-sized objects missed the slow, controlled movements of someone who'd infiltrated vampire nests through air ducts designed for decorative purposes. Dr. Octavius's lab occupied the facility's top floor, isolated from other research sections by protocol that suggested even other Imperial scientists found his work distasteful. Blade observed through a ventilation grate, his enhanced vision cataloging the room's contents. The doctor himself, middle-aged human male, soft from decades behind desks, eyes carrying the dead expression of someone who'd rationalized atrocity into acceptable research parameters. 3 lab assistants, all human, working with sealed containers marked with biohazard warnings in multiple languages, and along the walls, data terminals containing the research Crimson Dawn wanted destroyed. Blade noted exit routes, weapon positions, and the sealed containers' locations. Nerve gas was indiscriminate. Releasing it in a confined space would kill everyone, including him eventually. His healing factor could process most toxins, but concentrated chemical weapons designed by Imperial bioweapons experts might overwhelm even supernatural regeneration. He needed precision. The lab emptied as night cycle began, assistants departing for dormitories, security protocols locking doors automatically. Octavius remained, working late because men who designed genocide apparently struggled with sleep. He moved between terminals, reviewing data with the focused intensity of someone who genuinely believed his work served a greater purpose. Blade dropped from the ventilation shaft with barely a whisper of displaced air, landing behind the doctor in the laboratory's blind spot. His enhanced senses had already confirmed they were alone, no guards in adjacent corridors, no monitoring droids, just the doctor and his research. Perfect. Dr. Octavius, Blade said quietly. The doctor spun, his hand reaching for an alarm switch that would flood the facility with armed personnel. Blade crossed the space between them faster than human perception could track, his hand closing around Octavius's wrist with strength that stopped just short of breaking bones. Don't, Blade said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. You cooperate. You get a chance to explain why you don't deserve to die. Octavius stared at him with wide eyes, his scientific mind probably cataloging details: the impossible speed, the strength that held him immobile, the predatory stillness that suggested violence was merely a heartbeat away. Who are you? Someone who read your research. nerve gas tailored to Twi'lek physiology, biological weapons designed to sterilize Wookiee populations, chemical compounds that specifically target Mon Calamari respiratory systems. Blade's grip tightened slightly. "You're a monster wearing a lab coat. Give me one reason you should keep breathing." "I'm following orders. Imperial directive authorized this research. I'm a scientist. I don't make policy decisions. I just..." Blade's other hand moved to the doctor's throat, not squeezing, just resting there like a promise. "Wrong answer. Try again. Convince me you're worth the oxygen you're consuming." Octavius's breath came in panicked gasps, his eyes darting toward the sealed containers, toward the data terminals, anywhere except the Predator's hidden gaze. "The research. It's already been copied. Destroying me. Destroying this facility. It won't stop the program. The Empire has redundant backups across a dozen installations. Killing me just delays. Then I'll kill them too." The simple certainty in Blade's voice made Octavius understand this wasn't negotiation. This wasn't interrogation. This was a hunter, explaining to prey why death was inevitable. "Please," the doctor whispered. "I have a family, a wife, children. They don't know what I do here. They think I'm working on agricultural development. If I die, they'll mourn a man who used his brilliance to commit genocide." Blade's tone carried no satisfaction, no anger, just factual assessment. "Your family will grieve. And somewhere, maybe they'll learn what you really were and have to live with that knowledge. That's more mercy than you gave the species you targeted." Octavius opened his mouth, maybe to beg, maybe to bargain, maybe to accept the inevitable. Blade didn't give him the chance. His hand closed around the doctor's throat with precisely calibrated pressure, crushing the windpipe and snapping the cervical vertebrae in a movement clinical in its efficiency. The body dropped. No drama, no final words. Just a monster removed from the galaxy with the same efficiency he'd brought to designing atrocity. Blade felt nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt, just the familiar emptiness that came from eliminating threats that needed eliminating, one after another, decade after decade, until killing became mechanical and mercy became a luxury reserved for beings who hadn't crossed irredeemable lines. He moved to the data terminals, his stolen access codes provided by Crimson Dawn's slicers granting him entry to research files that detailed horrors dressed in scientific language, nerve gas variants, biological weapons, chemical compounds that turned entire species biology against them. All of it documented with clinical precision, as if genocide was just another research parameter to optimize. Blade initiated deletion protocols, watching as years of research dissolved into corrupted data. The Empire would have backups. Octavius hadn't been lying about that, but destroying this installation set them back months, maybe years. Bought time for the species targeted. Created gaps in their genocidal timeline, not victory, just temporary reprieve. But sometimes reprieve was all you got. The sealed containers required careful handling. Blade examined them with enhanced senses that detected molecular composition through scent-alone airborne toxins in concentrations that would liquefy organic tissue, tailored to specific species biology. The container's seals were secure, designed to survive facility destruction. Blade broke each seal methodically, then activated the laboratory's atmospheric venting system. The nerve gas would disperse into Scarif's atmosphere, at concentrations too diluted to threaten the surrounding ecosystem. Not perfect environmental stewardship, but better than leaving Imperial weapons intact for future deployment. Alarms finally triggered, not because of Blade's actions, but because the deleted research files had triggered automatic security protocols. Stormtroopers would converge on this location within 2 minutes. Time to leave. Blade returned to the ventilation shaft, climbing back through maintenance corridors as the facility erupted into lockdown. He heard shouted orders, running footsteps, the mechanical whine of blast doors sealing. By the time security reached Octavius's laboratory, Blade was 3 levels below, moving through water processing chambers toward the ocean. 2 stormtroopers guarded the maintenance tunnel standard protocol for facility lockdown, covering every access point. They stood at attention, weapons ready, professional soldiers doing their jobs with competence that almost earned Blade's respect. Almost. He killed them from behind, his vibroblade taking the first trooper's neck before his partner could turn, his follow-up strike dropping the second before alarms could be raised. Quick, clean, necessary, not personal. Blade dragged the bodies into the shadows where they wouldn't be immediately discovered, then slipped into the water intake tunnel. Behind him, the facility's alarm klaxons screamed into tropical night. Above, searchlights painted the ocean white, security boats launching from docks to patrol the coastal perimeter. Too little, too late. Blade swam into darkness, his enhanced physiology carrying him beyond sensor range before the Empire's response could coordinate. By dawn, he was 20 kilometers offshore, picked up by Crimson Dawn's submarine transport, a vessel that apparently existed in this galaxy's already impressive military technology and en route to the rendezvous coordinates. Voss was waiting in the submarine's command deck, his scarred face arranged in an expression of satisfaction. Our agents confirm Octavius is dead and his research destroyed. The Empire's investigating it as a rebel infiltration. They haven't connected it to Crimson Dawn. Good. Blade stood dripping water onto the deck, his weapons secured, his body already healing from minor injuries sustained during the infiltration. What's next? Rest, recovery, and then Voss activated a holographic display showing a space station orbiting a gas giant. We've identified another target, an Imperial Inquisitor operating in the Outer Rim, hunting Force-sensitive refugees. Maul believes you're ready to face another Force wielder. Blade studied the hologram, his enhanced vision analyzing defensive positions and approach vectors. Another Inquisitor, another opportunity to test himself against this galaxy's supernatural threats. Another step deeper into a war that wasn't his but was rapidly becoming inescapable. When? He asked. 2 weeks. Time to prepare. Time to refine your tactics against Force users. Voss's expression turned calculating. You defeated the fifth brother through surprise and skill, but the Inquisitorius is adapting. They'll expect you now. Expect someone who can fight Force users without the Force. Let them expect. Blade turned toward the submarine's crew quarters, already planning training regimens and strategic approaches. Expectations. Just make them predictable. Voss watched him leave, then activated a private communication channel to Maul's encrypted frequency. The Daywalker completed the mission, efficiently, professionally, and with minimal complications. Maul's voice crackled through, distorted by encryption and distance. Good. Continue his operations. Escalate gradually. I want the Empire bloodied. I want Vader's attention divided. And most importantly, the former Sith Lord paused. The communication ended. Voss stared at the holographic display, calculating probabilities and political angles. Blade was dangerous, a weapon without loyalty, motivated by a moral code that transcended galactic politics. He could be aimed at Imperial targets, but he couldn't be controlled. Not fully, not permanently, which made him either Crimson Dawn's greatest asset or their inevitable executioner. Time would tell which. In the crew quarters, Blade cleaned his weapons with methodical precision, his hands moving through familiar rituals that grounded him across dimensions and galaxies. He'd killed tonight, would kill again tomorrow, next week, next month. The faces changed, the circumstances evolved. The fundamental calculation remained constant. Monsters existed. Someone had to hunt them. And if that meant becoming a monster himself, if that meant walking the edge between human and predator until the distinction became meaningless, then so be it. The bloodlust whispered at the edges of his consciousness, controlled by serum but never truly silent. His hybrid nature demanded feeding, demanded violence, demanded the hunt that defined his existence. This galaxy would provide. It always did. Outside, Scarif's tropical paradise continued its rotation. Imperial facilities burning with sabotage blamed on rebels who hadn't been involved. Security forces hunting ghosts while the real threat disappeared into criminal networks they couldn't penetrate. And somewhere in the vastness of space, aboard a star destroyer cutting through hyperspace toward the core worlds, Darth Vader received reports of another Imperial asset eliminated by unknown operatives. Another disturbance in the carefully ordered galaxy the Emperor had constructed, another anomaly requiring investigation. The Sith Lord stood before a viewport showing stars stretched into lines of light, his breathing mechanical and rhythmic, his mind calculating patterns and possibilities. The hunter from outside their reality was still alive, still operating, still bleeding the Empire one target at a time with precision that suggested training, purpose, and most dangerously, competence. Vader's cybernetic hand clenched into a fist. Soon, he would find this anomaly, would confront it personally, would determine if it represented threat or opportunity in the Emperor's grand design. And when that confrontation came, one truth would be demonstrated beyond question. In the Empire, there was only one apex predator. Everything else was prey. The galaxy far, far away had never known anything like Blade before his arrival, and it would never forget him after. In the months that followed Scarif, his legend spread through whispers in criminal dens and terrified reports in Imperial briefings. The shadow that killed without the Force, the predator that hunted monsters wearing Imperial uniforms, the Daywalker who moved through darkness with purpose that transcended allegiance. Crimson Dawn used him like a scalpel, cutting away Imperial assets with surgical precision while maintaining plausible deniability. 3 more Inquisitors fell to his blade, each confrontation teaching him new ways to counter Force abilities through unpredictability and relentless aggression. He learned to read the subtle tells that preceded telekinetic attacks, to exploit the arrogance that made Force users assume supernatural power guaranteed victory. The Inquisitorius began circulating internal warnings. If you encountered the anomaly, you retreated and called for reinforcements. Engaging alone was suicide. The Rebel Alliance heard rumors and extended cautious feelers, hoping to recruit this mysterious warrior who seemed to share their enemy. Blade refused. He understood their cause. Freedom from tyranny was universal, but wars between governments weren't his fight. He hunted monsters. Sometimes those monsters wore Imperial uniforms. Sometimes they ran criminal syndicates. Sometimes they hid behind rebel idealism while committing atrocities in freedom's name. His moral code was simple: protect the innocent, eliminate threats, and never become the thing he hunted. That last one was getting harder. The bloodlust grew stronger, despite his refined serum, fed by constant violence and the galaxy's endless supply of beings that deserved killing. Some nights, after infiltrations that left dozens dead, he'd look at his hands and wonder if the line between hunter and monster had already been crossed without him noticing. Whistler used to tell him that the difference was choice monsters killed because they enjoyed it, while hunters killed because they had to. But after 500 kills in 6 months across a dozen worlds, the distinction felt philosophical rather than practical. Maul watched his weapon's effectiveness with satisfaction tinged by concern. The Daywalker was everything Crimson Dawn needed: efficient, ruthless, and unbound by Force traditions that made conflict predictable. But Blade's independence meant he couldn't be controlled, only aimed. And increasingly, Maul sensed the hunter evaluating Crimson Dawn's operations with the same cold assessment he applied to Imperial targets. The former Sith Lord understood. He'd created an asset that could turn on him the moment Crimson Dawn crossed lines Blade wouldn't tolerate. It was only a matter of time. Darth Vader's obsession intensified. Every failed Inquisitor, every compromised Imperial asset, every report of the anomaly represented failure, and Vader did not accept failure. He began personally investigating sites where Blade had operated, using the Force to read residual emotions and violence soaked into walls and floors. What he found troubled him. No fear, no anger, no passion, just cold calculation and controlled hunger. The anomaly fought like a professional eliminating contracts, not a warrior seeking glory or a Force user channeling cosmic energy. It was wrong, alien, and utterly fascinating. Their confrontation was inevitable. The Force itself seemed to be engineering their collision, drawing Blade toward operations that intersected with Vader's investigations, creating circumstances where the hunter and the Empire's ultimate weapon would finally face each other without distractions or escape routes. That confrontation would come soon, on a world where the Empire's cruelty and Blade's moral code would collide with Vader's relentless pursuit. The outcome was uncertain. Blade had survived things that should have killed him, but Vader had conquered galaxies. When an unstoppable force met an immovable object, something had to break. But for now, in the immediate aftermath of Scarif, Blade stood on a Crimson Dawn safe-house balcony overlooking a city whose name he hadn't bothered learning. The planet's twin suns were setting, painting the sky colors that reminded him of Earth sunsets viewed from warehouse rooftops in cities that felt impossibly distant. His serum was working. His weapons were clean. His next target was already identified. The hunt continued. It always did. Somewhere in the vastness of space, the Force rippled with anticipation, not because it controlled Blade's destiny, but because even cosmic energy recognized that something profound had entered its domain. A being from beyond the stars, carrying darkness and discipline in equal measure, walking a path that intersected with Jedi philosophy and Sith passion without belonging to either. The Daywalker had arrived in the Star Wars galaxy, and the galaxy would never be the same. Whether that change represented hope or horror remained to be seen. But one truth was absolute. Monsters across 1,000 worlds now knew fear in ways they'd never experienced before. Because for the first time in galactic history, something hunted them with skill and purpose that made the Force itself seem uncertain. In the end, that was enough. Blade had spent 40 years proving that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't power, it was the refusal to surrender to monsters, no matter what form they took or what galaxies they claimed to rule. This galaxy was learning that lesson the hard way, one dead monster at a time.